Hello, good afternoon everyone. Welcome to the Press Club here in Brussels and this event on the future energy system, meeting complexity with flexibility. My name is Sonja van Rensen. I'm a journalist based here in Brussels where I specialize in energy and climate policy. I have the pleasure of moderating this afternoon for you, and it's nice to see so many of you here. I think it's a little cooler inside than outside. I'm not entirely sure, but we'll see how we do. We do have a coffee break later on in the afternoon, so you'll have a chance to go and get some more water at that point. So we're here today to hear about three EU-funded projects, three Horizon 2020 projects. They're presenting their first interim results. That's TURBO-REFLEX, Pump Heat, and SCO2 Flex. And the goal of all three projects is really to look at how conventional power plants, so it's gas, coal, lignite. In practice, we'll be talking a lot about gas and combined cycle gas plants, about how they become more flexible and therefore play a more useful role, if you like, in an energy system that's increasingly dominated by variable renewables like wind and solar, and at the same time reduce their environmental impact. So on the one hand, we'll hear about what's technically possible, and I think on the other hand, we'll discuss a little bit, especially in the round table later this afternoon, what that means from a policy perspective. So what can we do? And if there are interesting innovations that can make these assets add real value to the energy system, what kind of a policy framework do we need to ensure that investments are actually made? So we have six speakers in total. We're going to hear from each of them. We'll open for questions immediately after everyone. So if there are things, especially because some of the projects are more, well, they're quite technical in terms of what they will describe. If there's anything you haven't understood or you want to hear more about, I would say that's the opportunity to ask. And then, as I said, we'll have a roundtable at the end where we can get into more of a discussion, and particularly also more on the political and policy side. One point to note is that the session is being live streamed and recorded, so if you don't want to be on camera, you're going to have to stand outside the view of the camera at the back or move your chair, but hopefully that's not a problem for anyone. And with that, I'd like to hand over to our first speaker of the day, Daniele Gentile, who's here as Executive Vice President of the R&D unit at Ansaldo Energia, so an Italian power engineering company situated in Genoa. It's an OEM, so it basically makes thermoelectric plants and components, gas turbines, steam turbines, etc. She's originally a chemical engineer and has been with Ansaldo since the mid-80s, working in all kinds of roles and ending up in her current position 3 years ago. And she also sits on the board of EU Turbines, an association here in Brussels that represents the turbine OEMs. So over to you to kick us off today.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Sonja, for introduction. And good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon, everybody. So it's a pleasure for me to be here and introduce this workshop on the future of the energy system. And let me start this introduction with a question. Okay. So it's okay. Better now? Okay, so here we are. Okay, let me start with the question. Introduce this workshop with a question that I think we all of us share in our mind. So, how will the energy system look like in 10, 20, and 30 years from now? This is forecast is very difficult always, but I think that now it is even more difficult because of the velocity, the unprecedented velocity with which the technology is enabling changing in our society. We can really say that we are in the middle of a revolution, a technological revolution, which is influencing every area of the business, society, and population. And I would like to start with talking about some mega trends that influence, in a way, the future of our energy system. So you can see here some words that are addressing mega trends that are really influencing our days. So the first one, demographic changes, is talk about world population. So world population in 10 years will be 4 times more. It means in 1950 we were at 2.5 billion. In 100 years from that date, so in 2050 we will be 10 billions, and this cannot be neglected for our, let's say, questions. So how will the energy look like? And more and more world population will be a population urbanized. I mean, in 1950, around 7 million people were estimated living in cities, so in urban area. In 100 years from then, there will be 10 times more. So this is kind of influencing as well. And in some way, also technological changes are challenging geographical borders. It means that in 2050, 20% of expats are expected to be around the world. And also think about how we communicate, how fast we communicate compared to even 20, so less than 100 years ago, so 20 years ago. And this is due to maybe the biggest technological change we have been living, which is the famous digitization. So starting from the web introduction in our worlds, everything assumed a velocity, an unprecedented velocity in changes. And just think about the 5G, which kind of velocity, additional velocity, 5G can introduce in the world. And so how fast we communicate, and how fast and how many data are interchanged all around the world. Data are, someone expect data to become to double every 1.2 years. And this is another, let's say, gives the order of magnitude of the complexity that we will be living. And also microprocessor will double their capacity every couple of years and will become even more cheap, so cheaper and cheaper. And so this and all those are factors that, of course, will be very much influencing. And let's come to the other mega trend, which put us closer to the topic of today. So sustainability. So sustainability is a word that has become very popular, and we have to say that people are becoming more and more sensitive to this topic. We have taken a couple of surveys, and we would like to show the result of this survey to you. This is a survey coming from a USA-based university that has made a couple of course, survey on which are the main, let's say, people are, let's say, afraid of, scared of. And in 2016, so the main concern of people were related, here it's even 97% others, because there were quite a long list of concern, but were more on economics, more on terrorism, of course, and only 3% of the people were concerned about topics in some way related to environment, also climate changes. And in a couple of years from then, this is the situation. So 27% of the same population is now concerned about environmental aspect of their daily life. And we have in Europe a similar survey available, so I will bring also this for the discussion. So 93%, this is a recent evaluation, 93% of Europeans are very, let's say, concerned about climate changes in their life, and they believe that these are, let's say, human related. So people awareness is growing and will continue growing. We have to take into consideration talking about sustainability. Well, we as Europe have, let's say, made our choice, let's say. So Europe has made its choice and has set goals in the short, in the medium, and in the long term. So the question is now, and those are the goals, let's say, the formal, the official goals we have to reach. And now the question is how to reach them in a viable way, economic-wise, because of course we want economies to continue growing. We don't want to face recessions. Huh? So let's see on the perspective of power generation, what does this could mean. We have reported a graph which introduced the energy demand in function of the CO2 emissions. So starting from, and then the size of the bubbles, of course, is the size of the economy, so of the growth. So this was approximately in the 90s, the size of the economy and the let's say the demand and the energy-related CO2 emitted in that days. This is the value in 2017. So economy grew, of course, but look at the almost double, let's say, CO2 emitted. This where we will be hoping to continue growing in economy-wise, but if nothing happened in terms of, let's say, policies on CO2 emission. This with our policy, so where we would be according to some policies, and this is where we should be, maybe, to address a real sustainable development. So it's a real U-turn. It's very difficult to get there. And the question is really how to decouple emissions from economic growth. So we don't want to decouple emissions having economies in recession. We want our economies or our industry continue growing, but reducing CO2 emission. And this is the big question, the big topic we have to address. And at the end, we have to say that as far as the energy market, so the power generation, the energy system, we can talk about sustainable electricity, which is made of 4 ingredients. So which is, of course, the demand side, so it's interested, the customer, the public, the people, and how it is managed. Is the supply side management, so it's part of ourselves, how we produce energy as industry, how is shared by our utilities, so our customer, to the public, how is shared throughout the grid, which is a very important player of this system nowadays, the grid. And how is stored. Again, talking a little bit about storage, and think that this, let's say, word would never been applied to energy 10 years ago. So no one would have ever thought about store energy 10 years ago. So how fast again it changed. So let's take a look briefly at a couple of these elements of this sustainable electricity system. Again, storage. It's a very important word, and in my opinion is what we will enable to reach our goal. And this is a graph taken from, there are a lot in the public available. This is taken from Hydrogen Europe. And this shows today, as today technology, which kind of technology we have available to store in the very short, in the medium, and in the long term. So we have batteries, we have compressed air, pumped hydro storage, and we have kind of, let's say, a set of alternatives. But if we want really to talk about long-term storage, what I think is that hydrogen is the ingredient. It's the ingredient we need to develop for the future. And if we want to reach the energy mix in 2050, that will allow us to become sustainable. Because, of course, we will not any, let's say, energy technology, which we will, but will be a mix. And hydrogen will be an important player. As far as supply side, I think here comes really with the topic of this workshop. We need to start from the very short. So to address the topic of flexibility, of efficiency, all those topics that are subject of the EU-funded project, we are going to listen the goal in few minutes. So it's talk about increasing flexibility, so reaching lower and lower minimum operating, so having them coming into the grid in a higher and higher speed, so all those topics are very familiar to all the OEM. And everything has to be done again, and has to be done by and cannot be done without conventional power plant, and in particular with combined cycle power plant, because they are now and they will be the only one capable to keep a stable grid. So to keep it stable and ensure a security of supply, which has to be ensured to our industry and to the people and to the population. Again, we will see the results of these three projects, so TURBO-REFLEX and Pump Heat and SCO2 Flex. And those are projects very important for industry and for academia, because of course, again, this is a so big goal to be reached that we need to think about, let's say, teaming up to reach it. So academia, industry, and policy regulators has to work all together. And when I talk about industry, of course, I talk about all the actors, because this decision, this goal we are, let's say, willing to reach is impacting not only, I'm talking about as an OEM, but is not impacting, of course, the OEM. It impacts at first utilities. So they have to deal with some constraints of existing assets. So for them, it's even more important to have their existing asset emitting as low as possible CO2 and be as more as possible flexible. Supply chain, so all the industry behind us that enable to maintain, to manufacture the parts, and of course it's a goal about finding the technology necessary to reach this goal. So in these terms, academia is a very important player. So at the end, I would like to conclude with, again, some other words which are more focused on our, let's say, goal, and to meet complexity and flexibility. So we see there emissions, flexibility, digitization, efficiency, and so on. And some conclusion that I would like maybe to discuss during the panel, the next panel. So we all agree, and I think that Europe has made the right choice. Difficult, but right choice. So carbon neutral by 2050. So we have to think this is a priority for us, but has to be viable, has to be sustainable, also for all the players. Industry, supply chain, everything, everyone has to find an economical way to let's say, to play his role in the system. And what I think, and this is in connection with the project I'm introducing now, that projects like that are even more important, because we will need a real huge amount of technology to develop to reach that goal. And we need to match and to be synchronized with this technology development and the investment that we as a society are going to play. So with these topics, I will leave the share to the other talk speakers. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for that, and I think you very nicely set the scene and set out really what the role of power plants will be going forward, what sustainability means, and also how they fit into the energy system as a whole. So plenty of food for thought to pick up on. I'd like to welcome our second speaker in that case, Mr. Heitz Siemers, who's here from the European Commission, the DG Energy. He's head of unit for new energy technologies, innovation and clean coal. Has been in his current position for the past just over a year now, but has been with the Commission for much longer, more than 25 years, working on a whole host of subjects. Not that long, just a couple of years. But comes with a very broad experience, so everything from EU-Japan relations, working on trade, consumer policy, and more recently, for a longer period of time, maritime policy. But here today, as I said, to talk to us about power plants. So over to you.
All right. Let's see how we do this. Can I close this guy, or is that going to break something?
Probably not.
Probably better not to close it, yeah? Then I'll just hold on to this. It's all right.
You can put it maybe down there.
I can close it just a second. All right. Anyway, let me start in the meantime, because we have a lot to talk about. And I will do a similar kind of scene setting, I think, from my end. So I look very much forward to our discussions this afternoon, because I think everything that's related to turbines and what we do with the energy production systems is, there we go, it falls, is going to be absolutely essential for us to move ahead with the energy transition. And, you know, the first starting point, of course, is the weather. Today is actually not so bad, but yesterday, for those of you who ventured outside, was a great deal of fun here in Brussels. And the thing that strikes me, just to put it in a little bit of a personal note, I've been in Brussels basically all of my life, with a few stints outside, but anyway, most of my life. I remember summers in Brussels used to be 25 degrees centigrade, 27 degrees centigrade, and if it was a very, very hot day, once a year, maybe you would get to 30 degrees, but that was it. And now over the last 5-6 years, we have a heat wave of 35, 36, 38 degrees, basically every year, and it lasts, depending on how much it is, either a week or it lasts 3-4 weeks like it did last year. So we can really see what the changes are. And then if you look at the broader picture, you know, every week you can find an article that will give you some piece of news that doesn't make you look or feel too happy. You hear the latest I heard was about glaciers in the Himalayas, which are getting less and less big, leading to potential water shortage for not a few million people, but 800 million people. So, you know, there is quite a bit of work for us. And the reason why I mention this is because decarbonization is no longer an issue where we can say, okay, you know, we have a few decades, let's think about it, let's see whether our politicians and our valiant leaders have some brilliant ideas, and then we see whether we can do something about it. It's something where everybody needs to be involved. And from everybody, with everybody, I mean everything from the level of citizens up all the way to the biggest companies and governments. And the next thing is that also then requires everybody really working hand in hand. No longer a situation where you can say, well, you know, we think we've got the best technology for decarbonizing, and therefore that's the way we should go, but more about how can we all find the best mix of technologies that's going to work, the best approaches that will work, and thinking a bit less about how much of a difficult issue is this going to be for my sector specifically, but more about how do we manage this collectively as either an economic system, an industrial system, or a society. Very tough thing. You were talking about the views of citizens that are changing with regard to the environment. I think the latest piece of evidence that's very concrete in that is the last European elections, depending on which member state you look at, but overall, if you see the increase in numbers of votes for the Green parties, among other things, you can really see that the perspectives are changing. Something even more concrete is we participated from DG Enner in a citizens dialogue. I think it is probably the first one we did, at least in our area of work, in Ottigny, not too far from Brussels here. And the thing that was striking about that discussion was the extent to which there was an underlying consensus that environment and climate are the big issues that need to be dealt with, and that they need to be dealt with, and that all the citizens want to approach that from their perspective. So there were obviously all sorts of discussions about what is the right thing to do and not, and how do European policies work in that area, and so forth and so on. But the overall consensus was really that. The positive thing, I think, that makes it interesting, and why I think our discussion today is going to be particularly interesting, is that everybody getting involved also means that we do have many options, and we have many combinations of options. And the interesting thing will really be to try and trash out what are the kind of combinations that we think of that we haven't thought about before, or that maybe can play a bigger role than we thought there might be. And I think, therefore, your title for the event today is absolutely perfect. Meeting complexity with flexibility is exactly what that means. All right. The next thing I think that then I want to pick up on is things related to technologies. We will have a lot of technical discussions in the course of the afternoon. But I think that the important perspective for me is really to see how does this work in the context of turbines and electricity generation systems. For example, one interesting discussion I had this morning, coincidentally, and interesting that you should have mentioned that as well, was about hydrogen and the potential of hydrogen and its use in the energy system. Now, you can take the cynical view and say, well, we've been talking about hydrogen for the past 50 years, and it was always the best thing since sliced bread, but in reality, we don't ever see it appear in any realistic shape or form. But having said that, if we look at hydrogen as an energy carrier, in a very neutral sense of the word, it is one of the best ones we have, because we can use it for storage, we can use it for transport, we can use it for generating energy directly. And it can also be used, for example, in the context of turbine systems, where you can add, for example, you can mix hydrogen into the gas system and see to what extent that is workable, and how, for example, the slight increase over time of the proportion of hydrogen in the gas mixture would be something that could help creating a market for hydrogen. Because the big challenge for hydrogen, for me, is cost in terms of producing it, particularly if you're talking about green hydrogen. Secondly, the scale. Being able to scale up the production of hydrogen to an extent that it's really going to be something that we can use on a large scale, and developing the market for it. And in that particular context, one of my views is, but this is after 1 year, so maybe in 3 years I'll be thinking differently, it's totally possible, but is that it would be probably a mistake in the context of hydrogen to focus on just 1 or 2 outlets for it, but that we need to find every market opportunity for its use in order to provide a market that will then also allow the scale up. It's not enough to just think about production or about market. We need both, and we need to find every possibility to be able to use it if we want it to be a real alternative, which I really think it is. The next thing I think in terms of the discussion related to turbines and systems related to it is everything that's related to efficiency, which is one of the priorities, if not the priority, in terms of energy transition for us. You know what the drill is in the context of the Energy Union. With the new target for 35% increase of energy efficiency that we have, which is something that is very interesting and very crucial, specifically in the area of turbines as a topic, and where I think there is room for a lot of reflection on how that works. We'll see that in the discussions this afternoon and in the context of your projects, but things like supercritical CO2, using of waste heat, trying to use other means of getting energy into the turbine than just using gas, never mind hydrogen that I just talked about, is one element. Another thing that I think is going to be very, very important in this context is something that we call industrial symbiosis, which is the coexistence of various industrial actors who work in totally different sectors, but who all have one thing in common, which is that they are big energy players, either consumers or producers or potentially both. Where, for example, you can get things like waste heat that you can use then in the turbine connection, or where you can find other ways of using CO2, supercritical CO2, as something that is produced as a byproduct somewhere and can get back into the electricity generation purpose and so forth and so on. So something that's an interesting avenue to pursue. The other thing I think that's going to be very interesting to observe is what happens with the energy system as such. Keyword prosumers. The fact that we are going to an energy system that is going to be far more distributed. We all know this. It's no longer going to be the classical approach of having big generators who pump their energy downstream and then you just have users at the other end. It's going to be much more of a mix, which means that energy production units, not only for consumers but in general, will probably have to be much smaller, much more distributed. And a lot of these units will not only produce energy as a consumption item, but also as something that you use to stabilize the energy grid in itself, which will be much more dependent on variable uses. And there again, the question is, how does that work as effectively as possible? And how, what combination of actors can you find? just to come back for a second to in the context of combination between actors to what I said about industrial symbiosis, this can even include what I would call, to use a phrase, unnatural bedfellows, in the sense of, for example, having heavy industry combined with data centers. Because data centers are huge energy users, but they also use their own ancillary systems, which kind of make sure that the data center keeps running whenever there is an energy problem. And these systems can in turn provide services to the energy grid, the same as you would do it, for example, for electrical cars when they're connected, that they could not only charge, but they could also provide energy to the extent that that is necessary. All right. Then let's go specifically to where we stand in terms of work in the Commission context. There's 3 or 4 elements there that I want to mention. One is, of course, the work that we do on Horizon 2020. We will be talking about a number of projects now, but we also have a call, which coincidentally there's going to be a briefing on this afternoon, which will kind of link into the work of the projects that is going on now, which is a call that is related to industrial waste heat to power conversion. And that's, again, about optimization of thermal cycles, life cycle assessment, transfer of waste heat to the energy generation sector, increasing efficiency, reducing cost, developing compact systems. So something that's maybe interesting also to watch out for, including to see how it can link in with the projects that we're going to be talking about today. In a broader context, I think what's important to keep in mind is where we stand now in the political and administrative cycle in the European Union. We're going to start out with a new commission. We have a new multi-annual financial framework which has been proposed. In that particular context, we have a new research framework program that is being proposed. Most of you will know already most of the details of what's going on there. I think the important part there is to pay attention to a number of things. One is the concept of missions, one of them being on climate, for example, the other one being on cities. Both of those are, I think, quite interesting in the context of where we stand for the specific subject of today. The fact that we have a mobility, energy and climate cluster, which means that we are looking at combining the research efforts in these areas far more effectively and far more efficiently. And last but not least, that we have a 35% climate mainstreaming target specifically for Horizon Europe, which means that even if it's not directly in the energy, climate and mobility cluster, there may still be things covered under other clusters that are highly relevant as well. Right. Other funding sources, I think, are also important. We can pick up on those perhaps in the discussion. I just want to mention regional funds, InvestEU, and in particular the need to increasingly look for combinations between public and private funding for 2 reasons. One is that there is far more private funding than there is public funding, 80% as opposed to 20%, we all know this, but also because private funding has one big advantage in terms of where we really want to get to now, which is delivery. That is that private funding will, of course, create far more pressure to actually produce results on the ground than research grants, for example. And that's something that is quite relevant. Speaking about delivery, we are at the end of one political cycle now in the sense of having delivered on the clean energy package. We have produced a long-term strategy communication. The council conclusions on that have just been adopted. The main element that I would want to pick up on, again, we'll maybe detail this more in the discussions later, is it's now about delivery. Links into what I said in the beginning as well. We're out of time in terms of trying to get to decarbonization. We really need to start acting. But I think also in terms of where we are now politically for the EU, now it's about delivery. We have done our plans, we have done our programs. Now it's about delivering results on the ground. Voila. I think that's as much as I want to say. I'm not the world's greatest expert on the subject that we're going to be talking about, so I'm here to learn. And I really look forward to the panel discussion this afternoon to see how far that can make us move ahead. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Once again, are there any immediate questions to Heitze? I had one question for you.
There you go. Okay.
Which is more to come back also to where you started and what Daniela also said. So climate environment has become a very big issue. And I guess my question is, well, to put it bluntly, how much political appetite is there to continue with these kinds of projects, investing in R&D and what are ultimately conventional plants fueled by fossil fuels? How there's obviously competition for funding. There's renewables efficiency. There's projects which have nothing to do with conventional power. So in the recognition they're needed, but how much appetite is there? How much attention and funding can conventional plants ultimately count on, do you think, if we look ahead kind of the next political cycle? How
It's a good question. I don't think that I can give you figures.
not figures, but
not
just
least
an
because we
idea
don't even know what the end figure is going to be for us in
no,
Europe.
but just more of an idea, a feel for, is there
I think
there's tension there?
the thing that you will probably know about what we're trying to do with regard to the energy system and innovation is technology neutrality. So I think that's the most important thing. And the second one is the obvious other objectives, which is decarbonization, energy efficiency, and so forth and so on. So those are the headlines. And within that context, I think everything that I said before, which is to try and see what combinations of energy sources and energy technologies can we find that will lead to a maximum of decarbonization, anything goes. So there is no, in that sense, I don't think there is any competition. I think I want to also again pick up to what I said earlier. This is not about competition anymore. It's about finding the best combination of what works and decarbonizes. And well, there are some obvious choices there in terms of which kind of energy sources or technologies one would really not want to kind of build up anymore, put it mildly. But for the rest, it's really about finding the best combination between the technologies that exist. And I think for turbines, for example, there are enormous opportunities there. Particularly, I think if you think outside the box, one of the things I did want to say in my introduction that I forgot because I probably had too many things anyway. But that was that I was at an event of I think the Turbines Association last year somewhere, or maybe earlier this year. And what struck me was that it was a very defensive kind of event. It was like, we are worried about the future of our sector because, it's about gas and it's fossil and therefore, ultimately we're going down the drain, la la la. That was a bit the atmosphere that was in there. And it doesn't have to be like that. It really doesn't. And I think already you've set it out a bit, and from what I see from the project and what we are also putting into our calls, there are technology opportunities, but we have to look at it in that perspective. What are the economic opportunities? What decarbonizes? What are the combinations of technologies that we can use?
Thank you.
Okay, well there you see. Yeah,
Okay,
you kicked it off.
Yeah, we'll take these two questions and then we'll
Maybe actually it's not so much a question, but just a reaction to what you just said. My name is Vania Kleiner from EU Turbines, the European Association of Gas and Steam Turbine Manufacturers. And actually the point of looking into the future and adapting the technology is exactly what we are looking for. At the beginning of the year, within the associations, with all our members, we published a commitment for the technology to adapt to renewable gases, including hydrogen, also with targets, to see how we can contribute in the future as well.
Yeah.
Okay, my name is Wolfgang Mohr from GE Switzerland, and my concern is when I listen to you is essentially that there are very mixed signals from your side. On one side you want to increase efficiency, which would typically mean a scale up. Then you discuss about making more integrated systems, so you scale down where you lose efficiency. Then essentially the symbiosis, which is very good, which is completely contrary to what happened in the last 20 years in the industry.
Sure.
And because whenever I see an oil power plant, they are very much in symbiosis with chemical power plant in the vicinity or whatever. And there's a discrepancy in wishes. So essentially you want to reach one thing and the other thing as well, and you can't decide somehow. And I think there one should essentially open the discussion, as you said, to find a good, in the end, CO2 reduction solution.
Yeah, you make a good point, but I think in terms of the specific of saying, increasing efficiency versus smaller, small is beautiful.
Small is beautiful, inefficient.
But in that, yeah, but I don't know because
there's physical reasons for it. So.
No, I understand from the technical perspective that certain systems will only work at a certain scale and so forth and so on. But then maybe if you need smaller energy systems, you need to look for a different technology. You see what I mean? Or conversely, if you that much I know. More, if you go into technical discussion, you lose me very quickly. But if you go, for example, with supercritical CO2, it's very probable that you can reduce the size of your turbines with the same kind of output quite significantly. So one doesn't necessarily contradict the other, or your efficiency actually works in terms of downsizing and not in terms of higher output.
This
Yeah?
was about
But that's just one thing.
It's very simple. Huh? So you have clearances, you have limitations which come from the physics, and all thermodynamic processes just became more efficient because they can scale up.
Yeah. No,
And you
then I
can-
understand. But
and
then
you
there's
can't
another
run
point.
against the physics, and then essentially you get into the same thing that you promise more and more efficient systems. Like for instance, that car will obviously use less fuel, but in the end it's not feasible because nobody can support it. And if you give signals in this direction that everybody should fill up, that would also be nice. Then in the end you will have some difficulties.
Yes, so I mean, I take that point. So the second message I had on that one is that I think technology neutrality is important because we don't want to go down the route of you know focusing everything on one thing and then finding out that there was probably something else that could have been used even more effectively, which applies to existing technologies as well as new technologies. So when we're talking about increasing efficiency, I don't think that it's necessarily increasing efficiency of turbines or increasing efficiency of turbines only to the extent that it has to do with scale-up. That's one. But the second one is, I do agree that there are some difficult decisions that will have to be taken at some point, because some of the technologies we're talking about, I mean, hydrogen is one example for me, or CCUS, for example, require massive investments. Absolutely. And if we're not able to make these investments, we will not lead those technologies to where they need to be in terms of being a real solution for some of the energy challenges that we have. But that's not a question of contradictory messages. I think that's just a sign of the complexity of the system that we're in, which will increase and not decrease over time. And the challenge, this is one of the things I'm trying to get across, to be honest, to my team as well inside EGN. I think the challenge that we have is not so much saying, we need to find this or that technology, or we need to find which technology is more relevant than another. We need to find the best way to make the system work. That's where the difficulty lies, and that's where the challenge lies. And then it may imply big turbines here, or smaller CO2 critical turbines there, or batteries and fuel cells somewhere else. That's how I see it.
Thank you. We're going to have to move on, I think. Indeed, I forgot to, you should all have a microphone when you speak. I think for the web stream, that's the main purpose. Obviously in the room here, we can all hear one another. Thank you very much for that, and we can certainly continue the debate in the round table when we get to that, I think. Our next speaker is Juan Carlos Garcia del Rio. He's a senior engineer at the operational planning department for Naturgy Generation. How do I pronounce it properly? Naturgy Generación. So formerly Gas Natural Fenosa, so Spanish natural gas and electrical energy utility. So he's going to give us more of the, not the OEM, but now the user perspective. He's been with Naturgy for 20 years, most of that time, or a lot of that time in Mexico, where he worked, ended up as operations director of the combined cycle gas turbine fleet. He was also involved in the commercial side, but came back to Spain 2 years ago. And as I said, now working in the operational planning department there, which means he basically coordinates the activity of the power plants serves as a means of communication for the front office. So to tell us something about the Spanish market and some of the challenges you see there, and also some of the opportunities going forward.
So it should be working. I'm sorry. Here we go. Come on. Good. Can you start?
Okay. Hello. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Sonja, for your presentation. And thank you also to the organization of the event for inviting Naturgy, Spanish utility, where most of our capacity is based. but also we have capacity around the world in the Americas and Australia, Africa, different places. Thank you again for the opportunity of providing Naturgy the opportunity to give its perspective of one of the key challenges that the energy systems in Europe will face regarding and one of the key elements that will make this transformation possible. I'm talking about flexibility of the conventional power plants that currently are running on these systems. To put that in perspective, I will talk about the Spanish electricity market. That's because it's what we know best, but also because I think it's a good example of how evolve, being one of the first countries to introduce renewables, the beginning of the 2000, and also because of the objectives that the Spanish government has already set for 2030. Are quite ambitious and can serve as a good example for other European countries. At the end, I will try to give some perspective also on how we see these opportunities and challenges that the current conventional fleet will face, and especially in the case of Spain, the combined cycle fleet. So beginning with how the Spanish system evolved in the last years, we had at the beginning of the 2000 and for a period of around 10 years a big investment in new capacity. We doubled the capacity of the system from around 50 gigawatts to 100 gigawatts. That increase was based on half of it was combined cycle, 25 gigawatts. And the rest came from renewables, mostly wind, but also solar. That expansion was trying to match an increase in demand that was also at that time going up at a good rate. But then in 2008, global financial crisis hit all the world, but Spain was especially affected and went into a deep recession for several years. You can see on the right side how demand stopped growing and in fact decreased sharply. And it's been recently, when Spanish economic growth has already begun to grow again, that demand has been slowly recovering. Not at the same pace. I think that's also a signal of efficiency. The economy is growing, but demand is not growing at the same rate. At the end, what happened? We after financial crisis, we have an overcapacity situation on the system. Peak demand currently is around 40 gigawatts when our installed capacity is 100 gigawatts. And that makes that the conventional power plants, coal and gas, that are the most expensive resources, are being very low utilized with their capacity factors have been greatly reduced since 2008. Currently, the share between renewables and conventional generation in terms of capacity is evenly split. It's 50-50 in terms of installed capacity. And in terms of generation, renewables, wind, solar and wind produce around 40% of the Spanish generation. Putting more focus on coal and gas and how they were affected by the combination of two factors. In fact, was the reduced demand after 2008, but also the growing integration of renewables in the system. So on the left side, you can see the red and orange are the capacity factors of coal and gas, and the dotted lines are wind capacity, and on the lower end, it's solar capacity. So you can see clearly how, especially the combined cycle capacity factor was affected by the reduced demand and growing renewables. Since 2013, average capacity factors for the Spanish fleet of combined cycles has been around 12%. On the right side graph, you can see we have plotted capacity factors for all our 50 power plants, combined cycle power plants in Spain, for year 2017 and 2018. Apart from a few outliers, the ones on the right side, with capacity factors of around 50–70%, like 80% of the fleet has capacity factors lower than 20%. Almost half of the fleet has capacity factors of 10% or less, and 1 in 4 of every combined cycle has capacity factors lower than 1%. So basically, 20% of the fleet is not running at all. What about the other conventional assets, let's say coal and nuclear? Regarding coal, we have 10 gigawatts of installed capacity, and nuclear makes 7.5 gigawatts. More than half of the coal capacity is expected to close next year. That's because of emissions directive that sets final limits on emissions from June 2020, and there is more than 5 gigawatts of installed capacity that won't make those new limits and will be shutting down, or they are beginning to shut down already. On the nuclear front, there is 7 plants, and recently the Spanish government reached an agreement with the owners of these plants to have a phase out of the nuclear fleet beginning on 2027 and ending in 2035. So that will reduce the overcapacity that has the system in the following years, but that reduction in capacity will be more than offset by the increase in renewable capacity that we expect to have in the next decade, and that we will see later. Moving now from a general perspective of the Spanish system to our own current situation and planning for the future, we have around 7 gigawatts of combined cycle capacity in 10 power plants. Almost 2 gigawatts of coal capacity in 4 power plants that all of them will be shutting down because of this emissions directive June 2020. One of them is already in the initial stages of the commissioning, and the other 3 are waiting approval from the regulator to shut down. Apart from that, we have 2 gigawatts of hydro capacity and 1.5 gigawatts of wind, plus 500 megawatts that we share with other owners in the nuclear fleet. What are we doing apart from planning this closure of our coal fleet? We are already developing new renewable capacity. For this year, we expect to put in service 1 gigawatt of renewable capacity, 700 megawatts of wind, and 250 of solar. In addition, we have a renewable development plan where we are analyzing around 7 gigawatts of renewable capacity, solar and wind, to be developed in the next 4 or 5 years. So again, we are moving. We have a diversified portfolio, let's say. We are moving out of coal, and we are moving in line with the general trend that is moving to a more renewable scenario. Okay, so moving ahead to what the Spanish government has already sent to the European Commission in its integrated energy and climate plan from 2021 to 2030. Here you cannot see it, but on the left side of the graph is the 2018 generation and installed capacity figures, And on the right side of the bar, it's the 2030 objectives that Spain has been established for 2030. So talking before on the right side is the capacity figures. The expected increase in capacity again is around like 50%. What we have today is moving from 100 gigawatts to 150 in 10 years. And that addition will be made basically of wind and especially solar. We have also some batteries on the top end, but basically the current projections are wind and a lot of solar. Installed capacity in renewable will be around 80% of total capacity. Of those 150 gigawatts, 80% will be renewable. On the left side, and generation side of the slide, there is expected also a significant increase, around 25% increase of total generation compared to 2018 levels. That's a lot, but that's not coming from internal demand. That only adds around 5% increase from 2018 levels. But that most of it comes from Spain becoming a net exporter of electricity instead of being a net importer as it is today. So most of that increase in generation, if it's to be met, will become because Spain becomes a net exporter to France and the rest of Europe. Okay, so what will this mean for the system? The most disruptive force in the system will be solar capacity of around 43 gigawatts. And that will create what is called the double valley effect or the DAC curve. On the left side, that's an example of California, a day in May last year. So it's a current situation that is facing California. You have this ramp down and ramp up with the sunrise and sunset. Preliminary analysis from Red Eléctrica de España, the Spanish transmission operator, show that these ramps, in the case of Spain, will be like 5 gigawatts per hour in like more than 13% of the time, so quite normal. And with extreme ramps of around 14 gigawatts per hour in extreme cases. So how the system copes with that variability, we will need, as it's mentioned before, to source that flexibility from different sources. Storage will be or has to be one of them. Improve interconnections with the international connection with other countries, demand-side management, but also increase flexibility from the current conventional fleet that in the case of Spain will be basically the combined cycle fleet because coal is going out. For that, on the right side, what the effects or what has to be done on the combined cycle fleet. This preliminary analysis from Red Eléctrica de España shows that the capacity factor of the fleet, of the future fleet, won't be very different from today's. Will be around 12-15%, the same as today. But the operation profile of the power plants will be much different. They will need to have greater ramp rates to accommodate this residual demand. They will need to start up and shut down much more frequently than today. The initial analysis shows like a double of cycling from current levels. The average plan in Spain now makes like 60 starts per year. That will mean that the average plan in the future will make 120. And we have the extreme cases that they are currently doing like 200 starts per year. And then again, they will need lower minimum loads that will be beneficial for the system, but also for the plants. The system will benefit of lower minimum loads because of greater inertia in the system and greater spinning reserves with it. The power plants with lower minimum loads also will benefit from less cycling and less wear and tear, and also economic benefits from being parked at low load instead of having a startup cost. So in brief, we will have the variability of wind and especially solar in this amount will require a lot of flexibility in the system that will need to be sourced from different places, but we think that one of it, a very important one, will be the current conventional power plants. So finally, again, centering it in the Spanish market and in the Spanish combined fleet, we see the combined cycle fleet will be the only one conventional asset that will be able to provide flexibility to the system, because coal is half of it is going out and the rest will face competition with the combined cycle fleet, and it's not either, there are possibilities of flexibility are not so good as for the combined cycle fleet. What challenges face the combined cycle fleet? I mean, right now, they have extremely low capacity factors, a good portion of the fleet. Capacity payments are low or going out. In the last years have been reduced, and some plants, they don't have any capacity payments. So with these low capacity factors and no capacity payments, they are currently in a struggling situation. But then again, they are expected to be there in 10 years' time. All these 25 gigawatts are expected to be online and to provide flexibility to the system. So we will need increased flexibility from the combined cycle fleet. That will require investment in the flexibility products. But again, right now, we don't have regulation or market rules that make these business cases for these flexibility products to work. So, I mean, not right now, but when this is really needed for the system, we will need some kind of support for these flexibility improvements to be put into the market. And that's all for me.
That's great, thank you. Are there any, I propose we stick to clarification questions at this stage for Juan Carlos' situation in Spain, yes. And I'll actually bring you the mic so that people watching can hear you.
My question is essentially, I have seen that you have made a tremendous approach towards more renewables, which is very good. And is then giving the result that the combined cycles are not running at a high capacity factor, so means hardly, they are running hardly. Now, do you remember back in the 2003, when the combined cycles were installed, what was the reason for it to actually replace at that time all the power plants by combined cycle power plants, because the capacity which you needed from your demand was sufficient at that time already?
At the time, I think the demand in Spain was growing rapidly, so the system needed more capacity, and the best available technology at the time was the combined cycles. Then we have an addition of renewable capacity into the system, but that was because it was supported by the government via feed-in tariffs and
the CO2 allowance prices, or the CO2 allowance prices were not also one consideration at that time.
No, at the time there was no CO2 pricing.
Okay.
So Olaf Bernstroch from Germany, from Siemens. when I see the figures you presented on your slides with regard to step out of nuclear and step out of coal-fired power plants, I think the situation is comparable to Germany. We also have a clear decision to step out of nuclear, to step out of coal till 2035. That was a pretty new decision agreement between the government and the industry. But now there's a strong debate to rediscuss the date 2035. There was a discussion about to have a faster step out of coal-fired power plant, to, let's say 2030. Do we have the same feeling, the same discussion in Spain to, in order to better address the CO2 reduction discussion?
Well, I think regarding coal, the half of the fleet is closing because of the emissions limits that come in place in June 2020. The rest of the fleet has adapted to comply with the limits. I'm talking about coal. And then we will see, I mean, then there is this balance between coal pricing, CO2 pricing, and gas prices, and the competition between coal and combined cycles. So in the coal, the plants that have made these investments, they face, I think, uncertainty about how much they will be dispatched. It will depend on CO2 pricing and coal pricing and gas pricing. Right now, in 2019, something that hasn't happened before in Spain is that combined cycle fleets are running more than coal. Typically, in this share of the thermal gap, coal and gas, all these years, coal has been ahead of gas because it was cheaper. But then when CO2 this year went to 20 euros and gas being very cheap globally, combined cycles are cheaper than coal. So the coal fleet is not running this year. So that's regarding coal. And nuclear, it's an agreement, a recent agreement between, I think it's like 6 months old. I think one of the things that the European Commission, regarding this energy plan that Spain, the draft that Spain sent to the European Commission, one of the recommendations of the European Commission is to provide more details on the nuclear phase out. So it's a recent agreement. I don't know how set in stone it's or might change, might not.
It's also a political decision. So nuclear power plants, I would say, they contribute to CO2 reduction.
Yes.
But the coal, so that's the difference with Germany is it's the coal plants leaving the market is because they will not comply with the industrial emissions directive. So
The ones that are leaving in the following months up to 2020, that's they don't comply. The rest of the fleet will be running depending on economics and
so that's
how
not
far.
there's not a political decision like there is in Germany to take them out of the market. That's perhaps the difference. Our final intervention.
We need to clarify here. If you talk about emissions, the emissions directive is presumably not related with the CO2. It's presumably related with NOx.
NOx, sulfur, and particles.
Correct.
Yes.
Yeah. And the CO2 emission is something different. So in 50 allowance.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, I propose we leave it here to give us time to get through our projects. Thank you once again, Juan Carlos. And we move on then to our 3 projects, and once we've heard from all 3 of them, we'll break for coffee. So first of all, TURBO-REFLEX, Dr. Christian Alborg, he's here as the project's coordinator from GE. He joined GE Global Research back in 2004, led their turbo machinery aerodynamics group in Munich and also globally, including for the US. And prior to that, you've had a very interesting career, was a mission scientist on a space shuttle, working on combustion and microgravity. Recently joined GE Aviation as a principal engineer in the experimental aerodynamics department, and as I said, is here to talk to us, give us a flavor of TURBO-REFLEX.
Good. Thank you for the introduction. Going to talk about the program TURBO-REFLEX. Yeah, and what does TURBO-REFLEX stand for? Perhaps at the beginning, it stands for Turbo Machinery Retrofits, enabling the flexible backup capacity for the transition of the European energy system. And we are a fairly large consortium, 25 partners in 9 countries. What's worth noting here, perhaps as a background, some of the main OEMs of gas and steam turbines are included in this consortium, such as GE, Ansaldo, Doosan, MAN, Mitsubishi, Siemens, and also from the previous talk, on the utility side, Gas Natural Fenosa, previously now Naturgy, is also part of the consortium. First, maybe a few words on the rationale and the objectives, on the background of the project. And the problem statement that we're trying to address is perhaps fairly simple, something we've already talked about a few times. The EU is developing a low-carbon economy that includes also the energy sector with a large-scale deployment of renewable energy sources. And to enable more and more renewable energy sources on the grid, that requires a highly flexible backup power is needed, and that at a very large scale. So if you just look at the development of renewable electricity generation over the past couple of years, the latest years are not included, so now we are just above 30%. You can see that it's rising fairly rapidly, perhaps not yet fast enough, but very substantially. And that's on one hand, if you just look at it as an average. But the problem with some of the renewables like wind and solar is, as we have also heard, the intermittency, or let's say the non-dispatchable nature, meaning we can't turn them on and off at will, and we depend on when the wind blows and when the sun shines. And so you get to these very large fluctuations. I just extracted here an example from the German electricity market from April. Around Easter time, there's the highest peak there. Basically 100% of the electricity demand was met just by wind and solar, by the renewables. However, if you just look a little bit left and right of the very high peak, you see it's pretty flat, pretty low. Generation is close to zero. Yeah, so here you see a bit of the day-to-day variation. But if you look at it more in a broader perspective over the year, you have the seasonal variation too. So if you go to winter times, you will find that for days or weeks long, the generation is very, very small. Yeah. So what that means is, in order to make up for that, we still need a backup capacity. And sort of the rough rule of thumb is it needs to be almost of equal capacity than the renewable generation. So what's the solution? We don't have large-scale storage solutions available yet. And by that I mean things like batteries, etc., that we also talked about. They are not yet on the horizon, especially on the massive scale needed. To build that up would take probably a fairly long time. But what we have is an existing fossil fuel plant infrastructure that can fill the gap cost effectively. In a sense, it already exists. The investments have been made, it's there. They can be used for that, but that would require shifting the role from providing base load to flexible backup power. And that's quite a different story because they were not originally necessarily made for that. Yeah, so there's new demands on the existing fleet. We heard about some of those requirements: high load change velocities, high turn down capability, meaning going to really low loads, can help a lot. Start-stop modes, very frequent starts. Those are the characteristics that are needed. But that means you have quite an increase in cost if you run the plants in the new manner due to increased wear, which leads to shorter lifetimes. You have a decrease in efficiency because of the faster wear. You can have unplanned outages, etc. So there's a whole bunch of challenges associated with that. And so the question is, how can we tackle that? And the idea is that we are trying to address in TURBO-REFLEX is critical components of those engines need to be made more robust and allow for retrofitting into the existing plants. And that leads us basically in summary to the mission of TURBO-REFLEX, which is the development and optimization of technologies which can be used to retrofit existing power plants as well as new machines also in order to enable more flexible operation, providing the flexible backup capacity needed for introducing a larger share of renewables in the energy system. We have 3 concrete objectives in the program that we're trying to achieve. Objective 1 is to reduce the cost per cycle. Yeah, there's a typical warm start, maybe today approximately 50 euro per megawatt. We want to reduce that to about 35 by increasing part load efficiencies, increasing resistance to wear, having more accurate live information, etc. The second objective is to increase the low load capability, or say the minimum load at which the plant can be run without shutting it down, because that will then reduce the number of hot stars required, and we say here in a very average level 150 per year could be reduced down to 100 per year perhaps, if we successfully increase the low load capability and thus avoid shutdowns, and we heard some of the advantages associated with that just now in the previous talk. And the third objective is to increase the load following capability, so in order to have faster ramp rates, going from perhaps 6% per minute of a combined cycle plant today to about 12. Now, how are we going to achieve that? On a high level, we have 3 technology-focused component work packages at the bottom. One focusing on the compressor off design operability, the second one on the hot gas path that includes combustion and turbine parts, and then mechanical integrity for flexible operation. Top of that, fed by those elements, are online plant analytics and monitoring. And then yet on top of that is a whole plant performance analysis that we do. And here the aim is translate the gains on the component level to the plant level, and even beyond that, what do the gains on the plant level mean for the operator in terms of how they can compete in the market and how they actually can run the plant. Yeah, I'm going to run now through a couple of those work packages, give you a flavor of what we do. I don't want to dive too much into those technical details, but just to give you an idea what we actually work on there in practice. Yeah. So if you look at the compressor, for compressor, typically one of the key elements is operability. That can limit quite a bit the way you can operate your plant, especially with regards to minimum load. So here we're going to introduce passive flow control, for example. Yeah, that's a new technology we are developing that will be tested in a research compressor. The design so far has been quite successful. We're also looking at optimizing various blow-offs and extractions along the compressor path, and how we can integrate it, for example, into a compressed air energy storage system. Yeah. And that will all have advantages in terms of also reducing minimum load, increasing ramp rates, etc. All those objectives I listed before. Yeah. And all these fronts, we've done already quite some numerical design developments, and so far that's looking quite positive. Complementary to that is then the combustor. Downstream, you have the combustion part of the gas turbine, and you have the hot high pressure turbine, for example. And so if you want to further reduce your minimum load, for example, you can run into instabilities in the combustor. You can reach lean blow-off limits. And so this is being tackled here. We try to extend the ranges there. Test rigs have been built. Data has been acquired. And so there's also focus on emission compliance, for example. And then also the element of how do we integrate that perhaps with the compressed air energy storage, now going from the compressor to the combustor as well. And then also a third element, how can we improve the cooling of some of our critical elements when you have these very frequent thermal cycling that drives a lot of your aging of the parts. And by improving cooling, you can help that. And there's, for example, new technologies such as additive manufacturing that open new possibilities that can help here. Third element is mechanical integrity in flexible operation. Basically, in short, we don't really have so much information, don't understand yet so well the material, how it behaves under extensive thermal cycling. Yeah, and so there's a lot of conservatism applied in the design space today. And if we understood this better, which is what we are trying to aim here for, then we can take out some of that conservatism, and that will then again enable faster ramp rates, higher number of cycles. Yeah, do we have to, if we understand, for example, how cracks are not only initiated, but also how they propagate, yeah, as an example, that can give us more room to operate. And also we can build a true online real-time blade life consumption tool, for example, for a steam turbine, by adding sensor at a critical element, understanding again the blade vibrations a bit better. We can see live how much of the life of the part we're actually consuming, and give that information to the operator, who can then make a best decision. Is it worth ramping up now? Can I do it faster than before, etc.? Make all those trade-offs in an educated manner. Online plant analytics and monitoring. That's basically not introducing new technology, but leveraging the data we have better. And also here focusing, for example, what are really the bottlenecks in the plant that keep us from operating more flexible, and then introducing very strategically extra sensors that allow us to monitor the state and the true limits of those components on one hand, and then also looking at fleet data globally, very heterogeneous data sets, and then start to apply machine learning algorithms and try to understand how can we, for example, increase the startup availability, reduce our cycle costs, etc. So we have done quite a bit of that already. Deep learning methods have been applied for extending startup availability, and the results we've seen so far are quite promising. And then lastly, the fifth element is then we want to translate these component gains into the plant level, yeah, especially with respect to some of our key objectives. So what does it mean that we have now a compressor that can operate more flexibly, has a larger operability, etc., with regard to the startup time of the plant, the ramp rate of the plant, the minimum load of the plant. Some of the elements going to the right basically have all the tasks listed there. We know some of them have no impact on some of these characteristics, but they can have strong impact on others. Yeah, so you see, for example, startup times, applying the right technology there can have a significant impact, as it can have on the ramp rate and the minimum load. Yeah, so those are preliminary results that we're feeding into our analysis tools. That looks already quite promising and goes in the right direction of the targets that we want to achieve. And then the last step is now translate the new plant characteristics into metrics that matter for the operator. Yeah, so lethargy as an example. If I run my plant now, and we can do this here virtually in a simulation tool that basically is a dispatch optimizer that we can apply to different markets. So we are mainly focusing on the Spanish market first because of our partner Naturgy, but we also have data for the German market, the Polish market, Italian market, UK market, etc. And they're all quite different. Yeah, it's also important to note that the share of renewables can be very different in these countries. The price of electricity can be very different. Coal versus natural gas is all not the same story. That makes it complicated. But hence, this is why it's so important to actually look at it this level. And so if you look at the graph, the top one, for example, just you see the load and the bars that go down to the very bottom would mean the plant was shut down. Yeah, and that's the baseline in blue that counts state of the art. And for example, thanks to reducing the minimum load at which the plant can actually run, our new virtual plant didn't have to shut down as often as the baseline plant anymore. Instead, it could run at a lower load. And that in turn actually means the operator loses less money or makes more money out of that kind of operation, as you see in the bottom graph. Yeah, and then you accumulate this over 1 year as an example, and you see what difference the new technology can make. Yeah, and so we do this for all the technologies we have. We can do all sorts of virtual plants, operate them, introduce them into different markets, and see what it does. And then the operator can actually weigh against what's the investment for the new technology versus the gain that I think I might be getting. So in summary, TURBO-REFLEX will provide retrofittable solutions for faster load changes, improve low load capability and economic benefits for plant operators. It will reduce fuel consumption and emissions due to shorter startup times and higher part load efficiency. The technologies will be compatible with existing infrastructure without impeding any CCS readiness. And also importantly here, the solutions that we're developing, they could allow up to 10% of the installed fossil capacity in Europe to be retrofitted already by 2030. So some of the solutions we're developing, they'll be ready pretty much almost immediately after the project finishes or within just a very few years. So this is something that can be fed into the market fairly quickly. Challenges are there. Certainly having all the major OEMs working together can be challenging at times, so sharing relevant data while protecting confidential information isn't always easy, but I think we've found our way to work it. The industry level, we are dealing with a fast-changing and highly volatile market. Sometimes I hear from operators they would love to know just what the market looks like a year from now, so this is quite a challenging environment. There's lots of industry reorganization going on, as you might have heard. And then on the European level, I mentioned there are large differences in the electricity markets between the countries, which makes standardization challenging. So there's not one solution that fits all. And then, as we heard also from Naturgy example, low capacity factors associated with the backup role of fossil fuel plants make the financial viability of additional investments in these flexibility options, of course, quite challenging. When your plant is almost never running, I guess that's also fairly easy to understand. Okay.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Once again, are there any questions to Christian on what he's presented about TURBO-REFLEX? Yes.
Sébastien Mortier from the Innovation and Network Executive Agency. So my question would be, after your presentation, there is the impression that this project has particular potential and applicability towards retrofitting. And is that your primary goal, to retrofit this already existing fleet for which you have some time of problem now to find real use, or?
Yeah, so this project, there's real emphasis on being able to retrofit rather than introducing only into new machines. Yeah, there was a project we had before that, Flex Turbine, which is a bit complementary. There the focus was still more on new machines. But here we are really trying to make sure that everything we do here can be retrofitted into existing machines and thus make best use of the existing infrastructure we already have today. But of course it can also be, will likely be introduced into new machines as well.
It's me again. I would have a second, maybe more a remark than a question then, but I think there is also a strong case to be made when talking about the developments you are doing with the potential for services to grid stability, because that's going to also be an issue, which is maybe, we talk a lot about energy sources and renewable sources and generation, because that's the most obvious thing to think about, but of course the contribution to stability thanks to these spinning generation sources is also very important, and that's probably also where potential future revenues might be generated.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's always good to...
Yeah, it's a good point. I think that was also Juan Carlos mentioned that. Yeah, correct.
Okay, thank you. Thank you once again. Let's move on to our next second of three projects with Professor Alessandro Sorse, who is here as the Vice Coordinator for the Pump Heat Project based at the University of Genoa. He's been a professor in the field for systems for energy and the environment for the last 3 years, and his area of research is everything around energy systems diagnostics, and he's here to tell us about the Pump Heat Project.
Thank you, Sonia. Okay, I will brief introduce the project, giving the motivation and focusing on the two main layouts that we addressed: the power-oriented layout, so combined cycle that operate over the grid, just providing electricity, and the combined heat and power layout, So this kind of combined cycle that are related to some heat demand can be a district heating network or industrial demand like a chemical factory. And I will show you some results, demonstration, and dissemination case. So the need was already stated by the other speakers. We are looking for flexibility, especially for those two kind of combined cycle that I presented. The idea behind pump heat is to coupling, so to create this kind of symbiosis, coupling combined cycle with fast cycling, highly efficient heat pump and thermal energy storage. The thermal system is integrated with advanced control in order to create a smart scheduling. And the heat pump is able to modulate the power in order to operate also on the reserve market. We have two different heat pump and thermal storage for the two layouts. For the power oriented, we work with a cold storage with a low temperature heat, about 5 degrees, while for the CHP, we are addressing 120 degrees for the district heating network. That is quite high for the standards now, but is what is in Turin, that is our test case. And also, we are focused on heat pump for steam production that apply to industrial case. The integration with the heat pump and the thermal energy storage aim to reduce the minimum environmental load, to increase the power ramp rate, and to increase the full load power output, increasing, of course, grid resiliency and flexibility. However, we are also focusing on off-design efficiency. The consortium of pump heat is pretty spread all around Europe. We have a strong basis in Italy. There is the University of Genoa, Ansaldo, and IREN, and RINA, and ITES that is supporting us with phase change material. We have Alfa Laval from Sweden that gives us the heat exchanger, Mayekawa that is based here in Brussels and delivers the heat pumps, and Siemens and Noveren from France that takes into account the control system. Moreover, we have Mitsubishi Hitachi from Germany that is developing his own steam producing heat pump, Orlen that is end user, and other two universities, so Limit Scientific from Switzerland and Thessaloniki University from Thessaloniki. This is a district-driven consortium. The idea is to produce something that can be ready to market in a short period, and we are trying to follow all the stakeholder requests or stakeholder needs. Which is the idea behind the project? So the first question is why to use a heat pump? Already Juan Carlos showed us the duck curve, but what happened also is that during high renewable production period, we have usually low electricity price. This is a nightmare for our producer, but can be a benefit if we can use this electricity in a power to heat approach. So with an heat pump, we can turn it in something that is different, so cold or hot heat. And thanks to thermal energy storage, we can use it when it's most profitable for the combined cycle. So, talking about the power-oriented layout, we started thinking out of the box. So basically, we leave the whole combined cycle within a box and we work on the intake. This is pretty straightforward approach, and moreover is O&M agnostic, so we can use this solution on all existing power plant or new power plant. The main idea is to have a heat exchange in front of the gas turbine, and we know that thanks to the combined cycle layout, changing the temperature in front of the compressor affect much more the power than the efficiency. So we have a kind of flat efficiency also while running at higher intake temperature, and that allows us, for example, to enhance efficiency while running in off design, as I'll show you later. So the main aim of this system is to increase the peak production, decreasing the intake temperature, to reduce the minimum environmental load increasing the intake temperature, and to enhance of design efficiency by increasing intake temperature. So what we are doing, we are turning intake temperature from a constraint to a control parameter. That means that we can create somehow the climate that we need to control the system. This is how it works in a simple way. We have in the ISO condition, we have the blue line. If we can control the temperature, we can increase the off-design efficiency thanks to the increase of the intake temperature, of course. And that is reflects also on the minimum environmental load that, as was already explained, gives us some benefit about startup avoidance and other effect. What we do during the low price period, we charge a TESS, so a thermal energy storage, a cold thermal energy storage, that can be used and discharged during peak period in order to have an increase of production. This is a way to have an electrical equivalent thermal storage. That it means that just by now, batteries are not so affordable. We cannot rely so much on that. In this way, we can use, of course, this is a simple example. We can absorb 20 megawatt of electricity during the low price period. We have a COP, coefficient of performance, or energy efficiency ratio of 3, so we can store about 60 megawatt hour of cold energy, and with some test efficiency, then we can release this energy in order to have a power boost. And in the end, we get an additional energy produced of 135 electrical megawatt. Of course, cannot be a magic. We are burning more fuel then, but we are burning it when it is useful, so when the prices are higher. Moreover, during the off-peak condition, thanks to the reduced minimum environmental load, we can decrease the fuel burned, so saving CO2 and saving some money that allow us to run longer. So basically, this is just the technical part. For the power-oriented layout, we see that we can have an increase in production of about 14% when using the cold thermal energy storage, or we can use directly the heat pump as a continuous cooling approach solution that give us a lower peak production and, of course, a negative effect over the efficiency due to the auxiliary consumption. The heat pump is auxiliary for the system. So this highlight why TESS can be a solution. We see also that we have a reduction of the minimum environmental load of about 17%, with just a slight reduction of efficiency, 1.5% efficiency, that can allow us to increase the turn down operating hour of about 15%. And we have also make a test case about the enhancement of annual average efficiency for the Turbigo power plant that operates for about 3,900 hours here in Italy. They can be, these hours were mainly at part load, and so we can have an increase of about 2% of the global efficiency. This kind of feature can be used to increase combined cycle profitability in both day-ahead market and ancillary service market. Of course, while making the analysis that also TURBO-REFLEX did, we have another variability. It is the ambient temperature. So in our system, in our dispatcher, we must take into account also the forecast of the temperature. And this will need a lot of work on the control side. The second layout is the combined and power layout, and basically couple the CHP with an heat pump. Which is the difference with this kind of a layout that is pretty well known? Is that we look at a close integration of the heat pump within the CC layout in order to increase the coefficient of performance and to have higher revenues. So, for example, we see that thanks to the TESS, we can increase the profitability of this coupling, and the heat pump can produce useful heat also displacing auxiliary boilers that are just by now the higher costly source within the district network. And also it can have an impact over the annual efficiency and economic performance. We are looking to two different layouts, a refit option and a new layout that include also flue gas latent heat recovery. This gives really a boost on the global efficiency. And we are looking for two different solutions, as said, for low temperature, so district heating network application, and for industrial steam case. This is an example of how the pump heat system works. This is the so-called iron diagram. We have the electrical production versus the thermal energy production. Thanks to the heat pump, we can increase the range of producing, of course, as in a power-to-heat approach, but moreover, we can have an increase of the global efficiency. This can help us to decoupling somehow the thermal demand by the electrical production in order to follow not just the heat demand request, but also the electrical market condition. So the main advantages of this layout is to operate the heat pump as a smart load in order to produce when the heat coming from the electricity, let's say, is cheaper than the one produced by the combined cycle and from heat-only boiler. We see that we can have an increase of global efficiency of about 1% for existing systems, while we can increase up to 11 percentage point for new installation with flue gas latent heat recovery. That means we must change something in our heat recovery steam generator. The heat pump, the integration with the combined cycle allow us to have a lower payback period because we have a higher coefficient of performance. And let's say, actually the market conditions are still not completely favorable. We have an internal rate of return of 10%, that means a payback period of 10 years. That can be just on the line, but we are looking, of course, for a different test case. The project will be demonstrated at the Iren Moncalieri combined cycle. Is a combined cycle connected to the district heating of Turin, so it will be not a full scale, of course, but a demonstration in relevant environment for sure. And also our validation at Unige moved from our laboratory of Savona to a Tirreno power plant. So we are in the premises of this power plant and we'll test the power-oriented approach. And of course, behind that, there is KTH that's working on the thermal energy storage technology, so phase change material, arrangement of heat exchanger, and so on. And they will develop their own laboratories. And okay, behind that, of course, there is a lot of technology issue to be addressed. And say during the project, we think to solve some of these problems in terms of control system and so on, in order to have something ready to the market for the 2023. I would like also to we have also start some common dissemination action. For example, this is the Sustainable Polygeneration and Harvesting Conference and Exhibition that will be in Savona from the 4th to the 7th of September. This is founded by several partners and sponsors, so Ansaldo, Fincantieri, Tirreno Power, so there are different Mitsubishi, Hitachi, Siemens and so on, and is also supported by the European projects that are presented here. So that will be an opportunity to continue with this kind of discussion, also going more into detail with technical point. Just as we'll have, of course, some opening session with the European Commission prominency, and keynote lecture, panel session, and of course, a lot of technical paper. So that will help also to boost PUMPIT, but also the other project dissemination impact.
Are there any immediate questions to Alessandro. Anyone with a question, something you want to know more about? Something that wasn't clear? You're saving yourselves for the panel discussion now. Okay, thank you. I propose we leave it there and move to our final project then to take us through to the coffee break. Thank you once again. Our third and final project is being presented by Dr. Albany Kanyak. So it's the SCO2 Flex coordinator at project manager for EDF R&D in her normal job. She's been with EDF since 2005, initially as a research engineer, but as I said, is here today to introduce us to our third and final project.
Thank you very much. And thank you to the former speakers, because I won't have to repeat what is flexibility. Thank you very much. So just to introduce why an operator producer like EDF is interesting in flexibility and why we coordinate this type of project. So EDF have a different strategic line, and in R&D we have 4 strategic priorities. That is to develop and to test a new energy service for consumer. So help them to have a more flexible network, to prepare the electrical system and future networks. So we have to deal with the demand and the production of electricity, and very flexible production of electricity, consolidate and develop a zero carbon, carbon neutral production mixes, and support for EDF our international growth by developing this type of research-based partnership. And in our project, we will interesting in order to consolidate and develop a competitive and zero production mixes. So what we want before to make the proposal of SCO2 Flex was to help to deliver more renewable energy in Europe and in the world, and consolidate the EDF group for nuclear power, as you listen during the latest news from the French energy politics, ensure the flexibility in the nuclear and in the renewable mix, and merge and anticipate the environmental impact. So as the former speaker explained, the fossil plants are one of important part of this flexibility issue. So you explain what could be the flexibility from a turbine provider, or maybe for other industry, but as seen by us, this is we have to deal with flexibility and equipment aging more rapid than we prevent at the beginning of the exploitation of the plant. So we have to deal with new problem on this equipment. We have to deal with the emission, because we want a carbon neutrality, it's okay. But even if our plant could be produce electricity in a very low load, really low part load of production, sometimes we have to stop them because the regulation of emission will not be okay. So we have to do that. We can be able to produce electricity, but we have to stop our plant in order to be okay with the regulation emission. So if you change our equipment, if you provide more flexible turbine, or more flexible boiler, or more flexible gas turbine, you will add more complexity in the operation of the plant. And the operation of the plant, it's not is provided by humans. So these humans have to deal with this operability more and more complex every day. They have to deal with process very longer, with a very complicated process. So we have to, as producer, to accompany, to be okay with them, with our people. And as we explained, we have to support the network, because electricity will come from renewables, nuclear, fossil plant, but we still have maybe some very we will have different demand because we can have demand from heat network, from electricity network. The industrial user will not have the same demand than the just a common user, so we maybe have to deal with the solar panels in house, we have to deal with auto consumption, with battery in house, so we have to provide to think about a real network support about that. So what is the current situation in actual current fossil plants? This is a current coal plants as they are exploited in Europe. So we can see the boiler part, we can see the post-combustion with all the depollution equipment, not CCS, but we already do some studies with CCS, and the steam cycle of the plant. And when we need to be more flexible, we will have a coal boiler, because we will deal with coal in our project. A current coal boiler is not very flexible. It's designed for base load. So if we ask to work at 20% load, it's quite complicated. The steam cycle, the turbine will have variable performance according to load variation. So we have maybe to think about something will offer more efficiency in a very low variation, and even with quicker ramp of variation. And after we have all the rankings, the water circuit will be very more complex, and with a management of this circuit very more and more complex every day, because the turbines are more complex, the boiler are more complex, and all this complexity can be a very important source of problem and on the plant. And after, the essential pollution control equipment that we have to put, and this equipment now, there are on our plant, but 30 years ago, maybe 40 years ago, for the first plant who are still in operation, these equipment were not here. So we have to we had to add them, and so we decrease the efficiency and the flexibility of the plant with this pollution equipment. So at the beginning of our proposal, we think to say, okay, maybe we can have to think out of the box, just have a blank page. So we will need to have a very good efficiency during the load variation, during all the load variation, quicker variation, very good efficiency when we are in a low load. Okay. Pollution equipment, carbon capture is essential. So we need to integrate them from the beginning of our solution, because we don't want to have a more efficiency penalty with the new equipment. We don't want to increase the complexity of the operation of the cycle. So we integrating them in the beginning of the solution. We think about, as operator, about the modularity of the cycle of the plant and the future maintenance of the plant. When you have more complexity with the turbine, with some other equipment, the maintenance could be very more complex, and we can have a very long time in order to repair, maybe to check your components. So please, when you develop a new solution, please think about the human who work on this solution. After, the ease of operation. Okay, that was one of our main complaints from the people we asked in EDF. It was, okay, it's more and more difficult to operate a plant. The fear of to make error during the load variation are very important, and the human error are essential to prevent and to understand. And after, because we are operator, we sell electricity, we want a cost control on the new solution. So our first idea was to change the working trade of the plant. And we opt for a supercritical CO2 Brayton cycle. Why a cycle with supercritical CO2 and not water and steam? Because first, supercritical CO2 is very compact. We will have a high density, we will have very compact turbo machinery. For example, 50 megawatts turbine is less than 1 meter. We will have a critical point, we will be very near to the ambient temperature, so the critical point would be at 31 degrees, so it's easy to stay at a critical point. It's easy to say in a monophasic cycle, easier than with a steam cycle. And the fair performance, if we reduce the compression work close to the critical point, we will have a better performance. And this type of cycle is very highly regenerative, so we won't lost a lot of power during the operation of the cycle. There is other argument that CO2 is a very abundant fluid. It's not flammable for the security of the people and the security of the plant. It's really stable and inert at moderate temperature. We know this fluid, it's quite referenced, and it opens new markets for this type of cycle. All these arguments are very close, and and we agree with the economics and the other arguments that maybe we can expect significant cost saving. Maybe we will reduce the footprint of the plant, so less metal, less materials, less cement, so it's better for our environment. We will reduce the water consumption of the cycle, because if we work with strictly dry air condenser, we won't use water in our cycle. And there is several potential applications as for the fossil plant, but for the renewable with thermal solar, biomass plant with a waste heat in industry, and even nuclear use. Our second idea was to integrate the constraint at the beginning and not longer suffer them. That's why we choose to optimize the operation during the future operating chronicles of the plant. So we take different scenarios with high penetration of renewable, 40% of renewable, 50% of renewable, 60% of renewable. We know what will be the impact and what will be the demand of the fossil plant for this type of scenario. So we take these future chronicles in order to adapt our cycle. After we say, okay, the environment is very important. Okay, we will take greater emission restriction than at present, and we plan to add maybe a carbon capture system, post-combustion capture carbon system. And as we know that this flexibility will have an impact on the aging of the plant, okay, we will try to choose the architecture and the materials that will better resist to the fatigue. Okay, maybe we will have less efficiency in base load, okay, but during the variation at low part load, it will be better for our plant, because we won't add more constraint on this plant. So this is a global approach of consortium. At first, and we finished just this phase number 1 this month, it was a flexible framework basis. So we make a preliminary selection of the most promising architecture of the cycle. We want to manage the fluctuation and the operating specification. So we ask to different operators. We make some benchmark with different fossil, but nuclear, but even biomass operator, in order to see what is very difficult for them when they operate and what they are waiting for a flexible plant. Now we are in the development of the critical components. So we develop the boiler, the turbo machinery, and the heat exchanger, which are quite new because it's a very compact heat exchanger. And next year we will attack the third phases of the project with all the studies about the cycle integration and the flexibility assessment. So we will finalize the design of a 25 megawatt electric megawatt cycle, building on all the data of the project, and we make a very important work. We will make a very important work about dissemination, exploitation, and presentation of this type of solution, even to other electricity producers and to other industrials. So, if we see the first results for a boiler, a boiler could be quite the same than a current coal boiler. But what we have to deal is that we won't deal with water. And for example, when we want to control the temperature in a current boiler, you can add some water in your cycle. It's okay, you manage the temperature. When you deal with the supercritical CO2, to add colder supercritical CO2 won't help the plant to manage, to control the temperature and the flow of the CO2. So we have to find, and we find recently, different solutions, different type of management of the flow of the combustor in order to prevent this type of events and to manage it really differently than a steam and a water boiler. So, yes. After the turbo machinery, and what we say before is that the turbo machinery will be very compact. We create a new shaft configuration. We have a high efficiency turbine with around 90% of efficiency. And during our partial load test, the simulation are in progress and we make the test next month. Okay, we have current efficiency about 65-75% with a 20% part load for the compressor and for the turbine. So it's quite good for us. And we are now construct a prototype of the compressor in order to verify all the simulation in load variation. For the heat exchanger, and that's one of the most progress of more important progress in the project, we develop a very high pressure resistant braided heat exchanger with an increased mechanical resistance that the current heat exchanger we know. For example, the current compact heat exchanger will go out until 900 bars, and our exchanger will go out, will break at more than 1,200 bars. So we are in the regulation, in the ASME code. We are more, how to say? We are more compatible with the current use of this type of exchanger in energy production. For the heat exchanger, now we will provide two new prototypes for two supercritical CO2 loop. So the Scarlet loop that is in Allemagne in Stuttgart. The construction is for July, and we will provide a very new heat exchanger for the Susan loop in Czech Republic. And the construction will end at the end of the year. For the materials, we choose new materials. We forget all we know during the current materials. We don't choose a nickel-based alloy because it's too much expensive, especially for the boiler. And now we proceed to different tests, to fatigue and corrosion tests. in our new loop in order to see what will be the comportment during a length of hours. We optimize the flexibility, so we will adapt for an inventory control strategy. It's quite new because, but it's simpler to manage the cycle for supercritical CO2. We reduce the minimum cycle pressure of the system with the inventory control. We still need a speed control in order to avoid the acid contents in the cycle. And now we are dealing with the operation of the compressor just near the critical point, and to deal how to work with this inventory system. Maybe we can have only one storage, maybe we can have more little storage at different parts of the cycle. The next step in the project will be to testing the heat exchangers and the compressor prototypes. We will make all the implementation of all control strategy for the load variation. We will have the cost estimate of the 25 megawatt power plant and even 500 megawatt power plant, and we prepare all the pre-industrialization of this type of cycle with economic estimation, with life cycle assessment, normalization question. And there is more general question after this project will be the testing of larger scale of this type of cycle in Europe, the question of regulation and normalization for this type of new equipment. For example, for the heat exchangers, the US and the China are more advanced than us in Europe. So we need to work a lot and to be present in the different committees in order to add our voices and our ideas, and the applicability of to other production electricity production methods for the renewables, so the thermal, solar, biomass, the nuclear, energy efficiency with the waste heat recovery. And our conclusion is that the first results show that it's a promising cycle for us. The first non-optimized results show better performance in low loads and in base load than the current coal and limit plant. We are around 49% of efficiency. The charging ramp will be faster on the electricity cycle, in the electricity part of the cycle, and the boiler part is still to be optimized, but we have a good luck. We think we will manage to optimize that, and we have real compactness of all the turbo machinery. The heat exchanger will be less than 2 meters of higher, and the turbine and the compressor are less than 1 meter for this moment, 1 meter longer. But we expected some difficulties. You need to demonstrate in a high power, high scale of this type of cycle. Verify that the operation of the cycle will be simpler than now with the steam cycle, and work on the acceptance and the regulation for this type of cycle. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Any clarification questions on this third and final project? Yes.
So you've nicely described the different main components of your system based on supercritical CO2. You have this turbine part and heat exchanger part, which are, it's already convincing now that they are going to be downscaled and have a high compactness, and therefore I suppose it's also one of the reasons why it's becoming more flexible, I don't know. But then also on the boiler side, is there a limiting factor on the boiler side?
The limiting factor will be the corrosion and the fatigue of the materials, and the size of the exchanger between the coal, so the combustion part, and the CO2. But for the moment, our estimation that we will be quite in the same size of the current size of the boiler. we won't be bigger, but not smaller, but quite the same size, and that's why we have a lot of work about the materials part in order to check and to find very not expensive materials with a good resist and a good compartment during all the time of exploitation of the plant.
In other words, the boiler being the same size as before,
yes, but,
it can still allow for a faster ramp up and down and faster behavior.
The ramp will be faster because we won't have the same problem with the materials and the thermal constraint. So we will add a faster ramp. It will be okay. And now we work on all the. For the warm start, it will be okay. We will add faster ramp, and we work in order to optimize the cold start and the ramp of the cold start. And even we will have not the same constraint on the turbine than for the steam and the water turbine. So for the turbine, we will have a faster ramp for warm and cold start.
Okay, welcome back, everyone. So we've got, you've met all of our 6 speakers already, and the idea now is that we have a bit more time. We'll have an hour and a quarter or so for some more in-depth questions and discussion on the possibilities when it comes to combined cycle plants in particular, but conventional power plants more broadly. How we can, to what extent we can increase their flexibility, what are the kind of limits we come up against technically. And then I think of interest, well, equally to our project coordinators, as I imagine to many of you, how can we make some of these investments happen if we say these are interesting innovations. So maybe to kick off, I wanted to ask our 3 non-project coordinators for a quick reaction to what they've heard and the kinds of possibilities that are out there. I realize it's interim results so far, but you've seen the objectives, you've had a flavor of what might be possible. How much excitement does this generate in you? Are you hopeful? Are you optimistic? Do you say, this looks great? Are there things you expected to hear about that you haven't heard about? Who wants to kick off?
All right. Well, there were a number of ideas that came to my mind. I'm just going to tick those off. The first one is there were some references to regulatory issues, and it would be interesting for me. It doesn't have to be an excruciating detail now, but interesting to hear what those regulatory problems might be specifically, because for me that's also part of innovation, is that you see whether the regulatory system works for the innovative processes that we're looking at or not. And then more broadly, also, what are the issues with the broader energy system that need to be taken into consideration? So we had a lot of specifics now on the technical solutions, which was very instructive for me, very, very good to hear. Particularly, I liked this thing about supercritical CO2 and the efficiency gains that it brings, for example. That was interesting to see. But the broader system kind of issues is something that I would like to look at as well. Then staying with how things work, I would be interested also to see a little bit how the 3 projects in terms of their output look if you look at them from the perspective of market take-up, both in terms of how realistic it is to expect that they will have a major role to play in the energy markets, and how much time that would take, for example. Then the competitiveness issue, I think we touched upon it a little bit with regard to US and China for some of the technologies. How does that look? And last thing that I wanted to do is make a reference to something which I think is quite relevant in this context here, is that we have something called the set plan, which probably is familiar to a lot of you, strategic energy technologies. But the reason why I'm mentioning it is because we have the set plan serves to link up what's happening at the national level with what we're doing at the European level, and to try and also combine private sector researchers and national level efforts in order to get to these strategic energy technologies as effectively as possible. And we're at the phase now in the set plan where we have a number of areas where work is being done, including in this type of area, where we're getting from the planning stage towards actually moving towards real developments on the ground. So now would be the time to actually see how your work can fit into what we're doing in the context of the set plan. And also because there was yesterday a kickoff on another subject, which is the European Technology and Innovation Platform on batteries, where we had a very interesting discussion among some quite relevant players that went directly to the heart of the matter. That is to say, if you want to build up a European value chain that pushes this technology forward, what are the conditions that you would need in order for that to work from the regulatory, financial, and then obviously technology perspective. So just a short, shall I say, promotion of that particular angle, which I think is relevant if we want to do things coherently at the European level. Voilà. So much from me.
Okay, great. Lots of questions we can address in a moment.
Okay. Well, I have to say that I'm not coordinator, but we as Ansaldo participate in two of them. So I'm quite, let's say, influenced by the two of them. So in particular to TURBO-REFLEX and Pampit. But in general, what I say, this kind of project are, let's say, concrete projects. So it's very, you know, they stay at the fact. I mean, and they are a kind of plug and play. So there are results that can be implemented and soon. And what was also mentioned before is that now we need to implement and quickly implement and to start moving into the direction of reducing CO2 emissions. And all of those projects are in this direction. And they will give us results to be implemented very soon. And to do what I think is the first step is the most important step. So to work on the existing assets, so to make the best use of the existing assets. So just to make an example, a figure that I did not elaborate by myself, but I'm just coming from a conference in US, and Professor Soja was there as well. And during the keynote speech in this event was given an interesting figures, and it refers to US market. And was said that, well, the average of the efficiency of the plants in US is very low. They have a very high mixture of coal and combined cycle, and this average emission efficiency is 52%. So, and he said, if we would only be able to be increased by 1%, this efficiency, it would be like that, taking off CO2 emitted by 2 million of cars. And this gave the magnitude of what those projects that are, let's say, give results can do immediately, quickly, to start this U-turn. Yeah. So this is something very important for me.
Heitze, do you know if any information like that, or Heitze or anyone else, exists at European level that would give an indication of, the kind of magnitude of impact we're talking about in these projects? I don't know whether you're aware of.
Yeah, but it would be interesting to have a similar, let's say, figure also at our continent level, a European level. I don't have it.
I'm not aware of anything. Yeah. I'm not aware of it either. So
I haven't seen any. Doesn't mean it doesn't exist, but I do think that it probably would be something that we would have to kind of pull together from various sources. But it would be very interesting to have that kind of an estimate. But it goes back again to what I said earlier. So what is the actual take-up perspective of this type of technological innovation? Because without take-up, it's not going to do anything in terms of actual CO2 reduction. That I think is really the heart of the matter.
Yeah.
The potential I can definitely see.
Do you have an answer to that question specifically?
Because it's an open discussion, or
I still wanted to come to Juan Carlos for an initial, but if it's on this point specifically?
It's on this point, because essentially the 50% are not really, essentially this increase you will achieve with a new power plant. typically, then you have a higher increase. And this higher increase is then going essentially that this power plant is running more often because of the higher efficiency. It pushes all the old power plants out of the market. So very easily, this is essentially the market game as you have it. So in that sense, the improvement comes from new technology, but in Europe we have a completely saturated market, overcapacity, and then it's really difficult to make some changes.
Okay, so you're saying it would be challenging to deploy these innovations at large scale.
If you have power plants already running.
Yeah, yeah. We'll get some. You're uncertain. You want to respond immediately, and then we'll come to Juan
I think
Carlos.
that those projects are working on those typically on those own efficiencies. So they work on the existing asset, so improve the efficiencies, and so we cut down immediately CO2. So it's also true that we have seen, for example, for the Spanish market, that the combined cycle are not working so much. So, but okay, if it's only the 10%, which was around the figure I received, okay, it's some CO2 we take out from this 10%. I think we should not waste anything contribution. So it's a huge step we have to make. Any contribution is valuable.
Juan Carlos, yes, you painted quite a challenging picture for combined cycle plants in Spain. Which of these types of innovations do you think you could, well, also realistically see deployed or make use of?
Well, this kind of, talking about TURBO-REFLEX, that is where I'm more directly involved. We are talking about like kind of major modifications to the existing equipment. So in the near term or right now, they don't have a business case in our current fleet because these very low running hours, they are not running, so that they don't have any money. I mean, they are trying to survive. They are not thinking about becoming more flexible right now. But, I mean, regarding your original question, how do I see this? This is very important. I mean, this is very important, these projects in flexibility. Maybe they are not viable right now. In any case, TURBO-REFLEX products are not ready to be commercialized right now. Christian said that maybe in 2 years' time or 3 years' time, they will be available for introduction in the market. Pump heat also talks about different flexibility options, not so related to the main equipment, but like in the auxiliary of the power plant, and that kind of other flexibility products that are not only seeing the main turbines, but looking at the behavior of the complete power plant. I think that they are very important also. So when I entered the project, kind of at the end of 2017, I see TURBO-REFLEX as a nice to have set of options, but like without a sense of urgency to work on them, let's say. But once I got more into the project and see the challenges that the electric system needs to face and needs to transform, I think these kind of projects are really relevant and urgent to be doing right now, because if not, we don't have these flexibility options to be implemented when the system needs them. Regarding how they will need to be supported or to make a business case for them, that's the part of the market rules or regulation that will need to be addressed at the time when.
Yeah, but yeah, that was also one of Heitz's questions. Can we talk specifically about the size of the potential, well, the size and speed of the potential rollout of these technologies? I mean, we've all touched on it so far, and the gentleman there said he doesn't see that there's no case for rolling them anytime soon. That's what you've said too. Christian, maybe. I mean, you talked about 10% retrofitting in, I'm not sure what time scale, but how do you see this?
Yeah, we estimated by 2030, with the first changes, upgrades being ready pretty much right after finish of the project. So as you said, within 2 or 3 years, we can start to actually roll out upgrades. So this was also your question, the pickup time. So I think we as OEMs generally feel quite good about this fact, even though we all feel there's more and more urgency around having an impact. But at least we have a pretty clear line of sight to having an impact that is not in the distant future, but quite still foreseeable, in my opinion. So I think that's the good side. I think we can point to a lot of elements that can have really an impact, make a difference, and in this case, the difference is always indirect. It is by allowing more renewables on the grid. It is not by running more, but providing the backup power to enable more renewables on the grid. And I think that's really the key point. That's what we're trying to get to. The challenge that I see, I think that has been talked about, on the user side. How do we actually pay for that? If the business case is for the plant to actually preferably not run at all, but still need it as a backup capacity, run at 10% or 5 or only 1 or 2, of course, that doesn't generate a business case to make an investment to make it more flexible. And I think that's kind of the challenge we see in terms of actually making an impact, bottom line, to the market, to the CO2 emissions in the EU. And so the question is, how can we get there, in my mind, that we actually make good use of these results, the best use we can. We are ready for that, but I think we need to get the right environment for actually doing that.
What kind of a regulatory framework, what regulatory issues do we need to resolve? Maybe also from the other 2 projects, how do you have any thoughts on potential deployment, how fast, how much? Either of you.
I guess that under Pump It project we have no problem about the regulation, because the idea is pretty simple. It deeply impact the main equipment, even if we work on auxiliaries. And it was created just to make it something that is really close to the market. And I just discovered during this conference that in Ohio, for example, General Electric already developed part of this concept to enhance of design efficiency. So we are really on the rush. So by my side, the perspective that is something that is really deserve to be exploited, deserve to be developed, is not really rocket science. It's something that can be something exists. So it's engineering at least, and it's what we are. So
when you say that there's no regulatory issue, would this? I mean, our companies, as soon as this is ready, the project comes to an end. Is there a business case to invest?
Yeah, we are working for sure on the year-end test case. So for the CHP project, for example, in that approach, we can have some problem, for example, with refrigerant fluid, because the charge of the heat pump can increase the bureaucratic work behind the power plant use. For example, we have this SEVESO regulation that if the charge of, for instance, if you use ammonia, you have too much of this fluid within your system, you must fulfill different requests. And then you switch from a normal power plant to a chemical power plant. It means a lot of hurdles for them that are running the plant. And so this can be, for example, a problem. But of course, we can select different fluid, for example. So we are really also thinking about that.
But as Juan Carlos said, I mean, if a plant is basically trying to survive, would an operator bother to look into these ideas?
Yeah, as far I know, the one that survived is the one that tried something new. I have experience of that in Italy. Of course, I worked in a power plant for 2 years, so I have that experience. And there was a head of a power plant that really made extraordinary things, looking at the control, changing the way they make the vacuum. They really try everything. So you must really think about that and do that, because it's a chance.
Just to complete, yes, they want to try and they try everything. I'm okay, but when we ask the question, because we already think about this type of solution in our plant, the acceptance of the worker is very low. Very, very low. Because for them, they work in a power plant, it's okay. But the idea to work in a chemical plant with a CVSO regulation is very, very difficult to make it acceptable for the workers. Because it changed a lot of things. There's some of people say, okay, maybe I will move with my family in order to prepare them, because now it's a chemical plant. Yes, but the risk is not the same. I'm not sure to stay. So it's very difficult. It's not only a bureaucratic work. It's a really important work for acceptance for the worker, for the society, for the city around the plant, and a very important, human resource problem, because you have to work with the acceptance. You can have, even if your city have a lot of a very high rate of employee due to the center, to the plant. The idea that now to have a chemical plant in the city, some people will be against that. So there is a problem of social acceptance of this type of changes. But for the worker, you can try everything. You can, even if it don't change the origin of the work, why they want to work for this type of plant. And now on the CO2 Flex project, yes, we already know that as we work on a new cycle, we will have a lot of work for the normalization, for the regulation of this type of equipment, because, for example, the compact heat exchanger are already used in chemical industry, but not in electricity production industry. So we have to change, we have to check, okay, how we manage that, how we do some pressure test. So there is a lot of things to do. If I can say that by luck, the Chinese and the US are more advanced than in Europe. So maybe they will have the solution and they will put the new normalization and regulation before us. So we will have to suffer this regulation. So maybe the US regulation will be better than the Chinese, I don't know. And but the different industry who develop this type of equipment already think about that. So, and now what we see is that in the next 2 or 3 years, we will have around the world 2 or 3 10 megawatt loop with a supercritical cycle. 2 with CSP, 1 with fossil plant. So we can hope that the changes, the regulation question will be quicker answered by the different government, and there is still a hope that supercritical CO2 cycle will be ready to operate for only electricity production for 2030, and there is already one commercial CO2 cycle for waste heat recovery in US, which called Ecogen. So they are already on the market. So now we can try that. The growing community about this type of cycle will improve and will increase the different politics, the different government. We will work with them. We present our solution during in face of very lot of people in order to speak and to increase the time to the new regulation.
One follow-up, and then we'll come. I know there's a question waiting, which is the work you're doing was initially or focused on coal and lignite plants, but looking ahead then, because that's, I would say, at least in Europe, probably a particularly challenging type of plant to roll these technologies out.
So
there
is one scientific aspect that which shows coal and lignite plant. It's just that the current call and init temperature and pressure was perfect for us in order to validate the development to the different equipment of the plant. And one of the logic reasons for this choice is that if we want to test, as in China and as in US, for concentrated solar power, we will have a problem because in Europe there is no possibility of very huge concentrated solar power. So we check for that. And what is important, and it's a really important work package in the project, is that to work on the dissemination of this type of cycle. So if we take apart, if we put apart the boiler part of our cycle, the cycle with the supercritical CO2, so the turbine, the heat exchanger, could be used on a gas plant, but with less efficiency because the current combined cycle are very interesting. But on nuclear plant, on biomass plant, on solar plant, on waste heat recovery, so we will validate higher level of maturity for this equipment for all application.
Yeah, so the focus will be, I guess, by necessity a lot broader.
I had a question related to the problem you mentioned about the social acceptance or public acceptance of having deeply technically complex systems and potentially dangerous complex. And the idea of industrial symbiosis was mentioned earlier this afternoon. And isn't that specifically this issue, but there may be also others, isn't that a reason to think, to think of including these more traditional and baseload energy system into, let's say, larger industrial environments where they might, and then they might come in complement as other systems around them, where basically security constraints or safety constraints are already there. So isn't that the case for more industrial symbiosis and developing the business case for those energy production systems there on those industrial sites?
I will just speak about the EDF experience, because we operate nuclear plant, we operate fossil plant, we operate hydro plant, we operate renewable wind farm and solar plant, and each time we want to move the different population from one type of production to another type of production. It's quite difficult. It's feasible. We arrive to do that, but people are used to work for a type of production, and for example, in our current fossil plant, coal plant and gas plant, in the recent year, it was very difficult for the people who work in this plant to say, okay, a few years ago we work 1,000 we produce electricity 1,000 per year. Okay, now we just have to produce 500 hours per year. It's very difficult. So this type of enchantment is quite difficult. And when we say, okay, as you already know, EDF say that we will close our coal plant in the 3 next years in France. So we already begin to work since 5 years with the workers, the local workers of this plant, in order to form them, to their formation, to make some instruction, to prevent, to say, okay, there is a lot of other employee in EDF. What could be for you? And for example, a turbine specialist will not maybe choose to work on turbine on a nuclear plant. No, maybe we want to choose to work for the commercial part or in the network part, because you say, okay, I'm not happy to work with a nuclear plant, or there is too changement in my work. So, but we can do that. We manage to do that in EDF. We prepare the people to do that. But there is a local aspect, because some type of this plant okay, there is a quite industry with a chemical industry, it's okay. But for the people who work, we have to prepare them, and we have to try to understand them, and it's quite long time.
Your experience
Yes,
is,
yes. We see every day with the supercritical when we present to people who work with steam and water. They always present a solution for water and steam. Say, okay, no, supercritical CO2 don't work like that.
I wanted to come back to one of the other points you'd mentioned, the rest, and Heitzi, you'd mentioned it as well, which is where Europe stands in relation also to other parts of the world. So you said on standardization, the standards may be imposed on us by the US and China. Heitzi mentioned competitiveness. On this type of research, can anyone give us an idea of how much of a leader is Europe? I know in certain aspects like grids, the rest of the world looks to Europe because we are facing problems that they will probably face before long. So when it comes to making the most out of power plants, how advanced is Europe? And on the regulatory side, are there other places in the world where we see innovations like this being implemented, and how is that business case then made? How is that made possible? Does anyone have any ideas? What about Mexico? You spent a long time there.
Well, Mexico is I think it's not comparable to Europe. It's the fossil combined cycle fleet is big and is like run like a nuclear power plant at like 95% capacity factor. So renewables are beginning to enter the country.
Europe isn't unique in carrying out this
Yes,
kind
I
of
think in
research at
America
all?
maybe California it's similar to what or maybe a bit ahead of Europe because of the solar capacity that's already installed there. Probably in other aspects like demand side response, or probably that the regulation in California maybe is some way ahead of Europe. Maybe we could.
In what way? I mean, specifically, if we say, what
Well, for
what
instance,
can solve, what can create business case on a regulatory level?
For instance, they have scarcity pricing in their markets. The
what side?
Scarcity pricing, like you could have spikes on price, like way up, and then with low capacity factors, if you reach those prices, you can make a business case. That in Europe doesn't exist. They have nodal pricing also instead of single price for all the country. That makes also give signals of where is more electricity supply or demand is more needed. But I think in Europe we have a different idea of that, and could be difficult to have a scarcity pricing or nodal pricing. So in any case, coming back again to the Spanish situation, I think it maybe sound a bit pessimistic, but it's not my intention. I mean, I think what is happening in Spain is good. The combined cycle fleet or the fossil fleet has low capacity factors because we have already a high renewable production. That's and more is what we are aiming for. So the future, we would like to have low capacity factors for the combined for the fossil fuel plant, very low as possible in the future. That will be the good news. But then, if they are needed for the system, we have to have mechanisms that provide what Christian was saying. I mean, that you run only 100 hours per year, but you are needed for stability of the grid, for security of the grid. Then you will have to be there, and there will have to be mechanisms that pay you to be there.
Scarcity pricing, or you need a capacity mechanism.
I think
I thought Spain has 4 capacity mechanisms.
I think for Europe we will be talking of capacity mechanisms because scarcity pricing seems out of the. Spain has capacity payments, has been reduced, and then only a small portion of the fleet, the newest portion of the fleet, has capacity payments. The older one has already. They don't have any right now. I think right now Spain is waiting regarding capacity payments to some final decision at the European level of capacity markets and capacity mechanisms. So to be in line with what Europe says it's acceptable for capacity mechanisms. And that should be probably early. Other thing regarding regulation that is in Spain is with this very low utilization of the combined cycle, some of them would like to be like mothballing, put out of service for a few years when they will be needed maybe. And there isn't a regulation for that in Spain. So some of the plants that they don't run at all, they cannot shut down temporarily for a few years and go back.
Okay. So mothballing is not an option.
It's not developed. It's an option on the law, but it's not developed at the detail level, let's say.
Okay. Christian?
Yeah, I'm not a grid expert, but I think since we talk a lot about the backup capacity need, I think if there's an opportunity, the larger you look at, in terms of on a European scale, of course, the higher the possibility that if the sun doesn't shine in Germany and the wind doesn't blow there, maybe the sun shines in Spain or elsewhere and the wind blows in Denmark, and we can sort of make up for some of that. Yeah, maybe we don't need as much backup capacity anymore as we have today. If we are better connected, and I believe we have bottlenecks. I think I heard talk about bottlenecks between Spain and France, for example, and I think the same applies also to other countries, So I think any sort of increasing that connectiveness would help all of us, and also reduce some of the need for extreme cycling and backup capacity.
Daniela, you want to?
Yes, more or less I'm in line with what has just been said, that I think we should start from the acceptance that there will be not only one technology. I mean, cannot be only, solar, only wind, only solar and wind. So renewable by themselves will not support us. So starting from that point, we have to accept that a backup power is needed for the all of us, because we want a stable grid. We want to be secured the energy to ourselves, to our industry, and from that point on to start implementing, a regulation that allows to, let's say, work and think more as a system. Okay, as a system, what I think is needed.
Yeah, and that fits with what.
Just to add to this, I think my reaction is indeed, I mean, don't underestimate the amount of work that we've put into organizing the networks and the grids regulation at European level to facilitate interconnection and to facilitate cross-border cooperation and so forth and so on. And there it's very much up to the member states also to put in place the measures that make that work. The other point I wanted to make is I think we will need every technology that there is. We've said that now several times, but what that also implies is that we really need to look at storage as one of the stability factors for the grid as well. Storage is going to be extremely relevant in terms of small consumers, people who have either battery or other storage capacity at home. We talked about thermal storage already in the context of some of the projects here as well as one of the storage mechanisms. We should also, in my view, not underestimate hydrogen as one of the means to have storage, particularly in those areas where there are no other means of getting energy moved quickly to a particular point in time. So all of these elements will be necessary, and the important thing is to make sure that the system as such has the kind of flexibility that allows to use all of those. And there's another element that I think we need to take on board, not only from the perspective of it's not going to be viable as a constatation, if you will, but as also a decision-making factor. Does it make sense to have high-capacity power plants if the end effect, never mind how efficient they are, the end effect is that they will not be running 80% of the time or 90% of the time, which basically, for me, turns them into stranded assets. So I think the question really has to be, if we want to use whatever it is that we do, I mean, in the current context, in this discussion here, we're talking about making turbine systems more efficient and so forth and so on. But whatever it is that we do, whether it's turbine systems that are more efficient, or we use batteries, or we use heat storage, or we use compressed air, whatever it is, we need to see where the various systems fit best into the energy mix. That is going to be the absolute discussion that I think we need. And for that, we need a much broader debate than on individual technologies. That is my concern as well. So coming back to what I said earlier about the set plan, in the set plan, we also have something called smart networks for the energy transition, which must be known to a number of you because it's from my perspective, one of the more successful activities that we run. One of the things it does is it looks precisely at that. It looks at the energy system as a whole and all of the components as to where they fit in and how we can make that work as effectively as possible. I think that needs to be part of the discussion, because otherwise we will end up either investing in areas where we then realize we had better put that money elsewhere, or we will end up with energy systems that will not decarbonize quickly enough, or we will end up with stranded assets, or whatever the other risks are, and so forth and so on.
Go ahead.
I totally agree. We need also to strengthen the grid and the storages. But also I have some question about storages. For example, in Italy we have a big hydro pumped storage capacity, but we underuse it. From 2003, it continues reducing the amount. And I have some idea about that. There is also some published paper that say that probably the point is who owns the storage. And so that can be a regulatory point that must be addressed, because otherwise
it's already in the regulation.
Exactly, the storage is not participating in the market then.
No, it's already in the regulations.
Okay.
If I
Then we'll come to both of you in just a sec.
I just have a question. Who will be in charge of this reflection? Because if I am a battery producer, I will try to send and to install the more possible battery rack in Europe. If I am a hydro producer, I will try to put hydro pump. If I am a hydrogen producer, I will try to put some hydrogen storage in Europe, all around Europe. And who will think about the coordination and of all this mix? It's not the producer. I'm producer. I want to make money. I want to sell my technology. Who will be in charge?
Within the Commission, DG Klima is thinking about reducing emissions. DG Energy is thinking about rolling out renewables. So, indeed, who brings it all together?
That's a bit of an oversimplification, but
yeah.
you know that. No,
Surprise.
I mean, just to react on that very quickly, I just mentioned smart networks for the energy transition. I think that has the potential to really build up the kind of discussion that we need in terms of integrating various bits and pieces of the energy system. That's one. The second one is that whatever we've done in the context of the clean energy package in particular, electricity markets, and we're still thinking about what we're going to do with gas, which is similar, and other governance regulation and so forth and so on, is aimed at facilitating as much as possible the development of markets, renewable energy directive and so forth and so on, to facilitate as much as possible the development of markets that will allow integrated energy systems as opposed to just one particular type of technology. And the third one, I think, is we really need to get out of this thinking that, this is my technology, I own it, and therefore I'm going to sell only that. We need to get out of that kind of thinking. It has to be about how do these things work together. Otherwise, we are not going to get there. I know that this is, counterintuitive. I know that, whoever is, produces a turbine, thinks this is the technology there. I need to sell that, and therefore that's my product. But I think it doesn't quite work like that. I mean, think already about the fact that you want to use a turbine as something that is an ancillary service to the electricity grid. Well, you can't just do that by selling the turbine to somebody. there has to be a discussion with all the other elements of the grid, including the TSOs, DSOs, ICT companies, in order to see how this can work as effectively as possible, and so forth and so on, in order to make that work. So that integration is possible, but it is a bit counterintuitive compared to the way in which we've been used to working for the past 20 years. But it's not just about saying, you know, I own this technology and therefore I want to sell the maximum of it. And by the way, we're having that discussion in the context of batteries right now. Because of course there is, let's say, if you look at it from the most optimistic perspective possible, there is a huge pull from the automobile sector now with regard to batteries. Which, if you want to see it negatively, could create the risk that you get batteries that are basically built only for cars. But the upside of that particular discussion is that this can pull the production of batteries and the building up of a battery value chain in Europe that will allow to have batteries for all sorts of applications, and in particular also the, how do you call it, the ICT integration of batteries that you will also need for them to be backup systems across the energy grid and so forth and so on. So that kind of integration, I think, is something that needs to be part of the debate, needs to be part of the way in which the various sectors talk to each other.
Yes, my name is Alexander Wiedermann from MAN Energy Solutions, and I'm working also in the TURBO-REFLEX project, which is very important for us, which is also very important to provide the reliable backup power. And of course, this is also the market where we think that that in the short term we can sell our products, of course. But on the other hand, we have changed as a company our name. We used to be Diesel and Turbo, and now we are Energy Solutions. So we are preparing solutions for the decarbonizing future. And this is also the same if you look at the website of Siemens or GE, MHPS. They all have these solutions for the future, for a decarbonized future in 2050, which is the day after tomorrow. And this public workshop also is entitled The Future Energy System. So that means I think we also should look a little bit more ahead, and we should also consider that the decarbonized 2050 can only be achieved with a very large amount of storage, in particular also of seasonal storage, to have a sustainable delivery of electricity and of course also of heat. And from my point of view, I think that to encounter these problems, we will need systems, solutions which include, of course, turbines, gas turbines, turbo machines, compressors, expanders, and so on. And so the solutions are more or less available, and every company offers the solutions, but of course, the customer does not have the incentive to buy these solutions. And of course, as a public enterprise, we have to earn money. Otherwise, we cannot invest into new solutions. So I would like to wish that an environment will be created that we can really achieve the goals by 2050 to have a decarbonized power and heat generation in Europe. And this means that actually we have to start now, and we have to create the incentives to start the developments for new systems right now.
Thank you. Yeah, we'll head across, but maybe indeed that it's very sensible to say this all needs to be part of an integrated system, but you still, I guess, individual companies still need specific incentives to make some of these investments that are. The business case is not going to be created just by saying we need it. It's part of an integrated approach. So how do you square that circle?
For me, one important comment here in terms of the decarbonization is this HOAX battery, lithium battery. If you look at the lithium, the gray energy in the lithium battery, this is horrendous. And if you compare what you damage if you deload the battery to gain power, you will realize that you have higher emissions just by the deloading than if you would start a conventional power plant. And please consider that if you try to imagine a decarbonized future with batteries or based on batteries. I think that is a poor storage. It has its use, definitely, but it's a poor storage in terms of decarbonization.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Actually, it might at the end be a little bit of repetition of what some other people have said, but I just wanted to make a couple of remarks again. First of all, I don't think it's only about a backup generation. So when we talk at least about turbines, we also have combined heat and power. Alexander just mentioned also this, and when we talk about energy systems and really sector coupling, that's also something that we need to keep in mind. So at least in the case of turbine power generation, then we really combine the gas, the electricity and the heat sectors. The second point that I would like to make is that gas turbine power generation is not natural gas turbine power generation. This is something that it will go more and more into that direction. So I also mentioned it that we look into using other fuels than natural gas. So in that sense, the projects that we heard about today, or at least the one on TURBO-REFLEX, it really looks into making the power plant more flexible in terms of operational flexibility, so ramping up, shutting down more quickly. The next topic that will come in the future is going to be the fuel flexibility. So actually trying to handle different fuels, different qualities, and going more into the renewable fuels. And on that, that's where hydrogen comes in place, where there will be some parts on flexibility that will be solved by batteries or other sorts of storage. But when it comes into seasonal storage, was already also mentioned, using the existing gas infrastructure, we can really use that in a different way, adapt it. And in that sense, a couple of things that we need. First, the amounts of hydrogen. So we need to make sure that this actually happens. Otherwise, we will not be able to actually do anything with it. And the second point then, of course, would be also to have some research and innovation support to make this transition and adaptation of also existing technologies
Okay.
Subscribe for everything.
Comments on that? Maybe to what extent are the projects taking into account all the potential future roles of power plants, including a change in fuel and so on?
No, I mean, simply, actually, you made my point. Yeah, I just wanted perhaps to add to that. Always, if you want to go fast, right? These are things that actually can be done fast. Yeah, we have the capability to add hydrogen to the fuel. Yeah, that's been done. Yeah, they can run with hydrogen. We can also create synthetic methane, etc. So there's a way to get decarbonized and still actually run what we call today the fossil fuel plants, but they will be decarbonized and they can fulfill the role in terms of grid stabilization, providing the inertia, providing backup capacity, etc. Yeah, it's all there and the solutions are there in pretty short time. Yeah.
Does changing the fuel have any impact at all at some of some of the operational aspects that you're investigating now? Does it change anything, or it doesn't matter?
No, it's not a particular topic of our investigation, but just in general, we know that we can handle it. Yeah, it's not that you can simply switch the fuel and run the power plant as it is today. You have to do some modifications, some upgrades, but they have been done and they can be done.
As was said before, hydrogen, which is the real long-term storage medium, needs to farm their economics. I mean, we need to find a business place. So he has to be supported. And in this way, indirectly, we will support combined cycle to be operated more, so to have a higher capacity, be used more, because they will emit less CO2. So start from retrofitting existing power plant and combined cycle by using hydrogen, adding hydrogen. So this is the first step, and I think this is a kind of initiation, you know, of a positive cycle.
Hello. I have a very naive question. It's also regarding we talk a lot of about combined cycle power plant flexibility, fossil power plant flexibility, interaction with renewable, with storage, but we are not talking about the nuclear and the nuclear flexibility, not so much from my point of view. And in the future figure, I don't know what is what are the maybe depending the countries, we may have also different approaches. But the flexibility, some extra flexibility of some nuclear power plants, could we consider them also comparison to the flexibility of the fossil plants?
Yeah, it's perhaps one for you. I think there is some
Okay,
flexibility, not as much as
okay.
gas, but
Now it's not the same flexibility, but I can assure you that we can do some flexibility with nuclear plant. Okay, but I won't share private and secret results. But it's able to and there is some studies, there is some universities, some industrial who work already on flexibility for the current and the nuclear plant. So yes, we won't have the same flexibility as a fossil plant. We won't start in 48 minutes. No, we won't start, but we can make some. We work more on the load variation during the operation of the plant, but there is some studies all around the world about this type of flexibility.
maybe on that note, I'm thinking at what point does it become more interesting to build an open cycle gas plant rather than retrofitting your combined cycle gas plant? Is that something, if we're talking about maximum flexibility, and that's the goal, then presumably those, or are those, is that the kind of decision, I don't know, you're the operator here, that you might one day find yourself having to contemplate?
Yeah, I mean, maybe in the future. Right now, we don't need more capacity, but so probably, I mean, what is makes a better business case to build a simple cycle unit, gas turbine, with all degrees of flexibility, or upgrade your combined cycle? That will be the question. In any case, I mean, even the current combined cycle, there are ideas or ways to make it a simple cycle unit. You can decouple the gas turbine from the steam turbine with a flue gas bypass. In the United States, some of the plants originally were designed like that, to be run as simple cycle or combined cycle. So even that can be made in the. You can have a combined cycle and a simple cycle unit at the same time. So.
In Europe, do you know the plants here? Is that?
I'm not aware. In Spain, I think there are not. I don't know in other countries.
For example, we have them in Sicily and Sardinia. So in Sardinia, main has a backup power, while in Sicily is running for peak production. And we know that this Sicily, even is really close to the rest of Italy, has completely different price. They are like 25 euro per megawatt more than the rest of Italy. So this is a business case for simple machine that make money. So.
Okay. Are there other questions?
Well, just a comment to this statement. So essentially, single cycle runs somewhere below 40%, and there are gas motors which are running already on 46%. So if you want to run the gas turbine as single cycle, there is better technology in between. And second of all, as you have only less than 40%, you are not competitive at all, because the attractiveness of the combined cycle is 60% efficiency and above.
Okay.
But I mean, there may be some instances where your 30% efficiency in simple cycle is good enough to go into the market.
Yeah. I think in Germany they're talking about build. Depends what you need them for, but in Germany it's a real discussion.
There are. Again, it's not only one solution. Again.
Yeah, maybe that's true. We haven't spoken we've spoken a little bit about different markets, but also looking at the results of the different projects. maybe can you give us a bit more of an idea of what looks particularly interesting for which markets, whether you focused on a particular geography, or to what extent are the solutions you're exploring, you know, potentially deployable across the whole of Europe? Are there major limitations or not? Yeah, go ahead. In terms of type of market and geography,
Yes,
climate, you mentioned.
we study a little different market, electricity market, but we have also the influence of ambient temperature.
Yeah.
So in the end, we'll end up with a map with different layout for different average, let's say, temperature. So for colder countries, we have a kind of solution that can be beneficial. For temperate, we have the complete pump-it approach, and for hotter, of course, it will be much more on the cooling side.
Yeah.
So that will be really, it's not so easy to develop these maps. We are trying to do that.
You cannot develop exactly the same solution for all of Europe.
Probably a solution must be tailored based on your climate and your market condition.
Okay.
It's something that is not pretty easy to develop.
There's going to be a drink soon, so if you could keep your conversations for just another 5 or 10 minutes, that would be appreciated. Yeah.
Yeah, just to say, I mean, I think that I completely agree with that. The solution has to be different depending on what region you look at, and that includes also, you know, what type of backup capacity or whatever it is you install. Just to be clear, again, I subscribe to everything that was said with regard to all the things that are possible with the turbine systems, and that you can have probably very interesting results as soon as you think outside the box in terms of, you know, different types of fuels, different types of mechanisms to increase the efficiency. We've seen some good examples here and so forth and so on, and we're going to need all of that. But in terms of regional differences, I think that's a very important point to look at as well, because we just have to look at how it is in Europe in terms of where the coal-fired plants are, where they're not, where people rely very much on gas networks and are thinking about injecting hydrogen into the gas network, for example, where there are a lot of renewables from wind, where there is a lot of renewables from solar. So the systems will have to adapt to the individual situations. The important thing for me remains that those who are the market players need to be kind of completely in tune with what is happening in the energy system in the particular area that they're going into, because that's the way we're going to get the most effective and efficient system that's up and running. And well, we've talked about enough practical examples for that for now.
We're coming up to 5 o'clock, and many of you seem to want to discuss. Maybe just to come back to what, for me at least, is one of the main points, which is kind of what we've talked about and also had at the beginning, which is still how, so on the one hand we're saying there's great technical opportunity. Everyone says we need more flexible power plants, but as we've heard from Spain, there's well, you didn't say quite the same, but at least in a lot of parts there's no business case to make these investments. So I understand taking a more integrated approach to the energy system can create a more interesting business case, but how does that translate into an actual regulations that enable the money to be put on the table? Because it's one thing to say, you know, we need it, but it doesn't translate, at least for me, I still don't see how that translates into a concrete business case. I don't know whether you can, and I'm thinking we have, I mean, in Brussels, discussions at the moment, sustainable finance, what's a green investment, what's not, and this type of work, for example, is that a green investment? I suspect many people would say, no, it shouldn't be on that list. But on the other hand, you could say, well, if it's part of a bigger approach, it should be. So it's still, for me, not, I miss the final link, if you like.
Yeah, but that's a very complicated discussion, and I'm not going to go down the route, even if it's tempting, about what is a sustainable investment and what isn't. But we have tried, and we continue to try to put in place the regulatory framework that makes it possible to do the energy transition. That's very clear. And then you have the political constraints that are all around it, which obviously mean that you can't make radical course changes in 5 seconds flat. You have to take everybody with you, including, by the way, socially, as we also kind of touched upon. What I do think is important, though, and you know, this is more my neck of the woods, which is trying to get a grip on where should be heading in terms of energy innovation over the next few years or so. It is going to be extremely relevant for us to know where the regulatory constraints are that don't work for certain types of innovation. So on that, I would definitely encourage you to just let us know what the issues are, because that's something that's interesting to follow up on without any kind of idea as to, do we want to do changes here or there. But what frequently happens is that you have a combination of either what's there at the European level and other things, or what is existing regulation at the national level, which then creates difficulties, particularly if you look at it from the systems perspective, in terms of linking up various types of energy systems in a way that's new. So that's something that would be very interesting to look at. The other thing is this incredibly difficult question of the business case. I think what we really need is we need more information from those who do projects of this nature, or people who are in innovation in industry or in the sector, to tell us what is the issue with the business case for every individual technology that's being looked at, or every combination of technologies that's being looked at, because that's the kind of information that will help us collectively, not just at the institutional level, but collectively, to determine which type of innovation, or where system-wise, where do we want to go in order for that to be successful. And at the end of the day, that's going to be absolutely relevant. So this kind of discussion, I think we should be having more. One of the standard phrases that I always put in these types of discussions, if you look at 2030, 2050, which is tomorrow and day after tomorrow, as you said it, the technologies are already there. In some cases, they need further development. They need to get to a higher TRL level, but they're basically there. They need scale up, they need cost reduction, and they need a market. And for those things, we need information about what it is that would either make them work or that hampers them from being a functionable solution compared to the situation today, and what it is that investors, for example, would need in order to help to push these kinds of solutions forward as well.
Maybe then to wrap up, everyone else on the panel, what is your main either regulatory constraint or challenge you see for taking your work forward? And ultimately seeing it being deployed in as many plants as possible.
Well, what I say is I agree, technology are there, and we are more than willing to further develop technologies to support. We need to find the business case, so we need to find a way together with, let's say, who is upstream, who is downstream, to find as was said before, in a kind of hand-by-hand way in a team to get this happen.
So the main
to make this happen, it's a
regulation
and to connect all the, let's say, all the players of the chain.
Different parts of the value chain.
Yes.
That's still a challenge. Okay, I'm going to ask each of you for at least one idea to leave Heitze with that he can add to his growing list. Who wants to go next? Juan Carlos. I know you have a long list of issues.
No.
You've got to pick one.
Not that long. No, I mean, thinking of in the future, in this, I think that the combined, the fossil fuel, or it's not fossil, or won't be fossil, it will be renewable gas and things like that. I think we will need like new services that today they don't exist. We don't have income for them, like spinning reserves and very fast RAM rates. So maybe we have to develop these new services that the conventional fleet or storage or the other sources of flexibility will provide to the system. Yeah. That currently are provided, but they are not valued, let's say, because they are plenty of them, or the demands of flexibility are not so demanding.
Yeah, so to develop new services,
well, the services will be there, but there will be value on them, and probably new products on the market that will be delivered by these sources of flexibility.
Christian?
Yeah, I think to summarize, I like what maybe many people intuitively think. I think, as we talked about today, the fossil fuel power plants can play a big role in helping the EU decarbonize. And we've demonstrated that we have solutions that can make an impact quickly. If we want to go fast, there's really considerable contributions that the industry can make here. It probably will depend on the regulatory boundary conditions, what gets implemented and what not. Yeah, and I think that's maybe a key message that drives in the end the contribution that we play, yeah, or don't play. Yeah.
So we're not at the technological limits of what power plants can do, or the regulatory limits of what they are allowed to do, let's say. Okay, and our final two representatives, an idea or a priority for you going forward, or maybe a direction you would like to see your research take, if not a challenge. Yeah,
No, just a few words. I think that just for the supercritical CO2 for electricity production, I think that now our main problem is just to have a real demonstrator in Europe, because the value chain, I think we have a very strong community, very active community on supercritical CO2 in Europe. Very good actor, university, industrials, maybe operator. But when I see the cost of the funding of the different international projects, the results are the same. $100 million funded by the Department of Energy in America, in US. In China, I think that there are more than $50 million of funding by the state. And in Europe, we don't have so much opportunities to make a very big demonstrator of this type of technology.
Okay, it's a very concrete challenge. Thank you. Alessandro?
It's pretty difficult because the problem is that it is really complex. So I don't know if we can think about changing our objective function, maybe switching from revenues to reduction in emission and so on. It's really difficult to create this kind of solution. I cannot really give a priority. It will be lobby otherwise.
Yeah. Okay. And there will be trade-offs, I guess, inevitably as well. A round of applause for our panel, please. And to you, thank you very much for your interest and questions. And I would say please do stick around. There are some drinks. I can see the man pouring looks like maybe champagne or prosecco or something similar. So make the most of it. Thank you for a very interesting discussion. I will certainly take away a lot. I think the power plant community there are a lot of options. They're committed to being part of the energy transition. How far will policymakers go to let them? On hydrogen, maybe